Chapter 242. Whatever you do, we'll do the same. Our legs are on everyone's bodies. Are we not allowed to come over? Bai Wei calmly retorted. Ling Feifei. Her expression was unhappy as she turned back to look at Mo Jingshan. The curtains and screens had already been removed. The students had either left or were queuing up by the entrance. Only Jin Wan, Bai Wei and Ling Feifei remained below the stage. They appeared suspicious and immediately attracted the attention of the school leaders. Jin Wan, Bai Wei and Ling Feifei stood below the stage. The few of you, why aren't you leaving the stadium? What are you looking at? The school leaders immediately turned back to look at them in dissatisfaction. Hurry up and leave. Don't peek here. Ling Feifei rushed to speak up. Headmaster, we still have some doubts about what CEO Mo said earlier. We wish to discuss it with CEO Mo. Originally she should have said, I, but Ling Feifei ended up saying we, giving the opportunity to be scolded to Jin Wan and Bai Wei. Bai Wei silently rolled her eyes. Jin Wan slightly raised her brows. Mo Jingshan only glanced over there. When he caught a glimpse of Jin Wan's figure among them, he remained calm and turned around. What do you want to discuss? Jin Wan's eyes were still calm. What do you want to discuss? Ling Feifei did not expect that after President Mo heard her words, he would actually take notice. She immediately ignored the glare of the school leaders and quickly walked over. Hello, President Mo. I'm a business management student taught by Professor Lin. My name is Ling Feifei. My family is from the Ling Corporation Bank. After hearing her name, Mo Jingshan had already turned to look at the other two people who had yet to approach. Seeing that CEO Mo was looking at them, Ling Feifei's heart was filled with displeasure. However, she forced a smile and said, those two are in the same class as me. They also live in the same dormitory. Like me, they're both Professor Lin's students. The school leaders saw that these female students were clearly here to pester or spout nonsense. They were about to step forward to stop them when Mo Jingshan's gaze caused them to retreat. They're all Professor Lin's students? Mo Jingshan smiled. It seemed like when CEO Mo mentioned the person 5 seats away from Professor Lin, he did not pay attention to Jin Wan's appearance at all. It had only been a short while, but he did not recognize that they were the ones sitting very close to Professor Lin. The smile on Ling Feifei's face deepened. She suddenly said sweetly, CEO Mo, I really don't quite understand what you just said. If you're not busy, would you mind having a meal together? The school leaders, Bai Wei, Jin Wan, this was too brazen. Jin Wan had met a lot of rivals in love, but no matter which one of them was at least scheming. She had never met anyone who directly asked to have dinner with Mo Jingshan in front of her. Compared to the speechless expressions of the others, Mo Jingshan casually glanced at Ling Feifei, asking without emotion, if you have anything to say, just ask. Why do we need to eat? It's almost noon now. President Mo must be hungry. Anyway, it's time for lunch. Let's talk while eating. Ling Feifei smiled sweetly, as though she thought that her beauty could move the man before her. Although Jin Wan and Bai Wei approached, Jin Wan did not speak. Instead, she wore a slight smile on her face as she watched this scene. It was as though she wanted to watch Mo Jingshan's show. That's true. It's indeed almost noon. The school leaders suddenly interjected. CEO Mo, we've already arranged a place for lunch. The other school leaders and leaders from the city's education department will be coming. Why don't you join us for lunch? Hearing the school leaders' interference, Ling Feifei could not pull a long face even if she wanted to. She thought for a moment and suddenly reached out to pull Jin Wan over, saying, CEO Mo, my roommate is also from High City. Although she's only the manager of a small studio in High City, she doesn't have many opportunities to meet you. However, she actually managed to meet you in T-City, which is thousands of miles away from High City. Isn't this a rare fate? CEO Mo, give me some face. Let's go for lunch together. Jin Wan was about to push her away when she heard her next words, and her lips trembled. She subtly pushed Ling Feifei's hand away and turned her gaze to Mo Jingshan. The man looked at her meaningfully and asked with a light smile, You're from High City? Jin Wan, CEO Mo is asking you a question. Are you scared, silly? Hurry up and answer. Ling Feifei reached out to pull Jin Wan, but Jin Wan purposely kept her distance. When she reached out, she returned to Bai Wei's side. To avoid awkwardness, Ling Feifei smiled and turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Mo, don't mind them. My roommates are all shy. Actually, they really want to have a chance to talk to you. Mo Jingshan held back a smile as he glanced at Jin Wan. When he withdrew his gaze, he did not look at Ling Feifei again. At the same time, the school leaders came over to say, CEO Mo, The leaders from the education department and the principal are already preparing to head to the restaurant. Do you want to go with them? I'll be staying in T-City for a period of time. There's still plenty of time for me to eat with the school leaders. There's no rush, Mo Jingshan calmly said. Many years ago when I was studying abroad, I've long heard about the university cafeterias in the country. Since it's already lunchtime, and since my classmates have invited me so warmly, why don't I follow you to T University's cafeteria for a walk and have lunch here? How about it? Ah? T University's cafeteria? Ling Feifei's dream of sitting with CEO Mo in a certain Western restaurant was instantly shattered. Bai Wei, who had not interjected all this while, finally spoke up. CEO Mo, if you really have such plans, T University's cafeteria is naturally the best choice. The chefs in T University's cafeteria are really skilled. It can be said that they are better than any other university's cafeteria in the country. Do you want to try it with us? The school leaders were about to collapse. What kind of god was Mo Jingshan? In the end, he refused to stay in the 7-star hotel that the school leaders had arranged for him. Right now, he didn't even want to go to the best restaurant the school had arranged for him. He actually wanted to squeeze into the cafeteria with a bunch of students? What kind of taste was this? Or was it some kind of hobby? However, Mo Jingshan had already personally spoken. The school leaders originally wanted to tactfully mention it again. In the end, under Bai Wei's polite invitation, Mo Jingshan lightly curved his lips. All right. Students, please lead the way. Seeing that Mo Jingshan really wanted to go to the cafeteria, Ling Feifei had never eaten in a cafeteria ever since she came to T University. Even if the food was said to be good, she felt that the food in this type of cafeteria could not be too clean. The quality was also average, so she had never gone there. But now. Chapter 243. The school leaders were afraid of neglecting him and originally planned to follow Mo Jingshan. However, the moment they lifted their feet, they heard Mo Jingshan's words before he left. It's enough with these students leading the way. You guys should go do what you need to do. There's no need to come with us. Mo Jingshan did not plan on letting them follow him. The school leaders were not foolish. They could tell his intentions and did not follow him. After thinking about it carefully, they felt that the 3 female students wouldn't be able to stir up any trouble in front of Mo Jingshan. Even if the 3 female students had any unruly ideas, they wouldn't be able to hide from people like Mo Jingshan. They didn't need to worry too much about it. There were indeed many people in the cafeteria. Due to Mo Jingshan's sudden appearance, the students in the cafeteria were in an uproar. Although the school leaders did not dare to follow them, they still sent security guards to maintain order in the cafeteria. The students who were rushing toward them were all chided by the security guards to return to the cafeteria and queue up. Not a single one of them was allowed to walk around Mo Jingshan. After Mo Jingshan entered, he calmly scanned the surroundings and stood at the back of the crowd. Seeing that the great CEO Mo was actually queuing up in the cafeteria, the people in front took the initiative to give up their spots. Mo Jingshan thanked them but did not go over. He remained standing in his original spot. Right now, Jinwan and Bai Wei stood behind Ling Feifei, while Ling Feifei stood behind Mo Jingshan. Furthermore, she purposely stood very close to him. There were 2 people between Jinwan and Mo Jingshan. There were quite a number of people who wanted to give up their spots. Gradually, some of them were embarrassed to stand in front of Mo Jingshan. Seeing that Mo Jingshan did not move to the front, they all consciously moved to the back. The long queue gradually shortened until they became the center of the line. The people in front who were almost there did not pay much attention to the back. After all, there were several lines here. Some people did not give up their spots. Ling Feifei saw that these people were not aware of it and suddenly walked to the front, rudely chasing them to the back. When the people in front realized that CEO Mo was queuing with them, they rushed to the back of the line. Mo Jingshan's indifferent gaze swept past them. He spoke to the spoiled Ling Feifei in an unperturbed and emotionless voice. If you don't have the awareness to line up properly, you should at least learn not to decide for me whether to stand at the front or the back after I've already made my intentions clear. You don't have the right to chase away anyone who's queuing according to the rules. Ling Feifei, who had been proudly showing off to everyone that she was the closest to CEO Mo, was suddenly scolded by Mo Jingshan's expressionless and cold voice. She immediately bit her lips heavily, her brows showing a hint of unhappiness and stubbornness. CEO Mo, I'm only doing this so that you can quickly taste the canteen's food. Furthermore, your time is precious. Lining up is too much of a waste of time. That's why I want everyone to consciously give up their spots. Mo Jingshan coldly and indifferently said, Then you'd better learn to put away your self-righteous thoughts. Ling Feifei had initially thought that COMO had a slight impression of her, which was why he had agreed to have a meal together. He had even lowered himself to come to T University's canteen. She did not expect that he would not give her any face. Ling Feifei felt extremely embarrassed. However, there were so many people watching. Furthermore, Mo Jingshan was the honorary principal. It was not too bad for a student to be lectured by a principal. She quickly suppressed her emotions and lowered her head to apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll be more careful in the future. I won't act on my own." As she spoke, she consciously returned to the line. Bai Wei and Jinwan were very close. Jinwan heard Bai Wei use a voice that only she could hear to say, "Serves you right." Although Ling Feifei indeed deserved it, Jinwan's attention was never on Ling Feifei. Ever since they left the stadium, she had been trying to find an opportunity to meet Mo Jingshan's gaze. She wanted to ask him if he was serious. Was he really going to T University's canteen? However, the man did not place his gaze on her again. She could not find an opportunity to meet his gaze. Now that there were two people between them, there was no chance for her to ask what exactly he was planning. Was he trying to make her heart, which was currently beating wildly, suffer a heart attack? After much difficulty, they finally managed to queue up to buy the canteen's set meal. Another student took the initiative to give up a clean table for them. After Mo Jingshan sat down, Ling Feifei rushed to sit by his side. However, Bai Wei took the seat first. Of course, she maintained an appropriate distance and did not cross the line. Ling Feifei was exasperated. She took the tray in her hands and sat across from Mo Jingshan. However, the moment she approached, she saw that Jinwan had already taken the seat across from him. Although she wanted to scold them and chase them away, Mo Jingshan was sitting right here. She had to maintain her image and could only endure. She put on an aggrieved expression and sat diagonally across from Mo Jingshan. "There's no soup in today's set meal. Do you guys want to drink water?" Bai Wei asked. "All right, then go buy a few bottles of mineral water. COMO spoke so much earlier. I'm sure he hasn't drunk any water yet, right?" Ling Feifei opened her mouth. After speaking for so long, she only had Bai Wei buy it. She remained seated. Bai Wei narrowed her eyes at her. "The canteen supermarket is just 10 meters behind you. I'll have to walk much further than you to go around such a long table. You only need to turn back and walk a few steps to buy it. Are you sure you want me to go?" In any case, didn't Ling Feifei wish to pretend in front of COMO? She could continue acting. She could not find an opportunity to order others around. Bai Wei would not spoil her. Ling Feifei turned back to glance in the direction of the supermarket. "Jinwan, you go. I'm not thirsty. If you want a drink, go buy it yourself." Jinwan used her chopsticks to pick out the bones of a piece of fish. She patiently picked through it while calmly speaking without raising her eyelids. Ling Feifei immediately rolled her eyes at her. She placed down her chopsticks and stood up to head to the supermarket. "COMO, we weren't too rude earlier in the stadium, were we?" Seeing that the noisy Ling Feifei had left, Bai Wei politely asked. Mo Jingshan glanced at the fish bone Jinwan was picking out and saw that she had also picked out a very small, thin and hard-to-find bone. After making sure that she would not be stuck in her throat, he looked away and said indifferently, "No." Jinwan was stunned. The silence did not last more than 3 minutes before Ling Feifei returned with water. She had only bought 2 bottles. Clearly, one for her and one for Mo Jingshan. When she sat down, she placed a bottle of water in front of him. She smiled sweetly and said, "COMO, please have some water." At this moment, the fish Jinwan had just eaten was slightly salty. She immediately coughed. Mo Jingshan expressionlessly pushed the bottle of mineral water that had not been placed down for more than 5 seconds in front of Jinwan. His thin lips only spat out 2 words, "You drink." Chapter 244. Jinwan's throat was indeed salty. She instinctively picked up the bottle, twisted it open, and drank a mouthful. Ling Feifei's expression immediately became longer. "COMO, I bought this water for you. Earlier, my roommate said that she wasn't thirsty. There's no need for her to drink your water." Earlier was earlier. Now is now. Can't you see that Jinwan has been salted? Speaking of which, the fish is indeed a little salty today. Bai Wei glanced at Ling Feifei as she spoke. "Also, don't always call me your roommate. Do Jinwan and I not have names?" I was afraid that COMO wouldn't be able to remember so many names in such a short amount of time, so I didn't say anything. Ling Feifei carelessly explained as she glanced at Jinwan in dissatisfaction. Seeing that Jinwan had no qualms about drinking the water, she became even more unhappy. "Thank you, COMO, for the water. After Jin Wan finished drinking, she placed the bottle down and raised her eyes to speak to Mo Jingshan. She then smiled as though there was no one else present. To others, this smile of hers was purely a smile of thanks. However, from Mo Jingshan's perspective, this little woman was intentionally watching him make a scene, and now she was clearly seducing him. No need to thank me. He also smiled slightly. His gaze was deep, appearing calm and indifferent. Seeing that Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan could speak to each other over a bottle of water, Ling Feifei felt even more upset. She suddenly regretted dragging Bai Wei and Jin Wan along to look for Mo Jingshan. Otherwise, the two of them would most likely never have the chance to sit and eat with someone like Mo Jingshan in this lifetime. Furthermore, earlier on, she was the one who suggested to have a meal together. Right now, Mo had only come to a place like the cafeteria to give her face. If not for her, would Jin Wan and Bai Wei have such an opportunity? However, although she was unhappy, Mo Jingshan was seated diagonally across from her. Ling Feifei controlled herself and did not continue dwelling on this problem. She only said, Mo, why don't I go buy another bottle for you? No need. Mo Jingshan also picked up the fish bones on his plate, calmly replying. His gaze was very light. T University's cafeteria would always be bustling with noise during lunch break. But today, because of Mo Jingshan's presence, many of the students did not speak loudly or play around. After eating, they quietly filed out. It was rare for them to be so quiet. Ling Feifei had barely eaten anything. She truly felt that the food in the canteen was not very tasty. However, when she saw that Mo Jingshan didn't seem to dislike her at all, and his table manners were calm and elegant. Such a lofty man actually had such a mundane side to him. The more she looked at him, the more charming he became. After taking a few bites, Ling Feifei could not help but mutter, President Mo, don't blame me for being talkative, but you're really so handsome. After that, she continued to ask in a low voice, Mo, are you married? Ahem. Jin Wan suddenly coughed. He coughed as if he was choking. He turned to the ground and coughed a few times, then picked up the bottle of mineral water again. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. Jin Wan avoided his eyes, held back her cough, and drank several mouthfuls of water. Ling Feifei was extremely displeased with Jin Wan's despicable actions of intentionally diverting Mo Jingshan's attention. Jin Wan, why are you coughing out of the blue? Can't you see that he's talking? The fish is too salty. Jin Wan placed it in the water. You're still eating salty fish? It's salted fish. If it's not salty, how can it be called salted fish? Bai Wei said. Ling Feifei decided to ignore them. Her gaze stubbornly turned to Mo Jingshan. Mo, is it convenient for me to answer my earlier question? Mo Jingshan's gaze was calm, gentle, and unhurried. I'm married. Ling Feifei's anxious and expectant expression immediately collapsed. First, she did not expect him to actually be married. Secondly, she did not expect him to answer so directly. It's such a pity that Mo actually got married so early. What's there to pity about marriage? Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her, his tone clear. I'm very fortunate to be able to marry my current wife. After having her, my once unchanging life has changed because of her. In my eyes, she is the most important person. Once a person walks through the world, they must have a pair of hands that will never leave. Only then will they not truly be alone. Jin Wan's eating movements gradually slowed down. She raised her eyes to look at the man sitting opposite her, only to see that his eyes were filled with a hint of warmth that she often saw. She actually did not know that when Mo Jingshan mentioned her in front of outsiders, he would actually be like this. It seems like Mo really loves your wife. I'm so envious. Ling Feifei forced a smile. All of a sudden, she really wanted to know what kind of woman a man like Mo Jingshan would treat so attentively was like. Hearing the word really loves, Jin Wan's grip on her chopsticks tightened. In an instant, her heart seemed to be filled with boiling emotions. If she had not maintained her composure, she would have directly pounced into this man's embrace. Unfortunately, at this moment, a male student from Professor Lin's class walked into the cafeteria and bought a bottle of water. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly spotted Jin Wan and smiled at her, revealing his white teeth. Jin Wan, I was wondering why I couldn't find you anywhere. Why did you suddenly run to the cafeteria to eat? After all, Jin Wan had good looks and was usually quiet and low-key. Many of the hedonistic young masters in Professor Lin's class had good impressions of Jin Wan. When they walked past each other in T University, those cold and arrogant fellows would always greet Jin Wan amiably. Today was not an exception. However, from Mo Jingshan's perspective, that was not the case. Jin Wan smiled and turned back to greet him. When she turned back, she met the man's mild gaze. Several minutes later, Jinwan rose to head to the restroom. T University's cafeteria's restroom was very clean and quiet. Every half an hour, a cleaning lady would come to clean it. Although there were many students entering and leaving, it was still very clean. At this moment, many students had already left the cafeteria. Jinwan walked into the female restroom and turned on the tap to let out the water. She leisurely rubbed her hands. After washing up, she had just turned off the water when a white figure suddenly flashed in. She turned back and saw Mo Jingshan. This is the female? Jinwan was about to speak when she saw him close the restroom door. Jinwan's hands were still wet. She was startled for a moment before hurriedly placing her hands under the air dryer to dry them. As the wind whistled, the man's long lashes lowered. He looked at her and took 2 steps forward. What happened to the man earlier? Chapter 245. This was the female restroom. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one outside, he actually came in as he pleased and kissed her as he pleased. However, it was undeniable that no matter how cold and aloof Mo Jingshan appeared in front of outsiders, when he lost control of his emotions, only she could see it. Thinking of this, Jinwan's heart was filled with happiness. After being kissed and bitten, Jinwan was still smiling. The man pinched her chin. You're still quite happy? Jinwan feigned ignorance. What? The man's emotions were unreadable as he watched her calm expression. As expected, I shouldn't have let you come to T University from the start. This really wasn't a wise choice. Don't misunderstand. He's just a classmate. Normally we'll see each other all the time. When we see each other we should at least greet each other. Is that so? Why didn't he greet your other 2 classmates? Perhaps I'm better looking. Jinwan spoke the truth. In any case, she could not lie in front of Mo Jingshan. Any lies would be useless in front of him. It was rare for the little woman to be so narcissistic. Mo Jingshan coldly scolded, Very proud of yourself? How am I proud of myself? Earlier on, I was almost moved by you. I had to force myself not to speak. Right now, can't you feel my excitement and my expression that's as warm as a spring breeze? Jinwan leaned into his embrace. Since the restroom door was already closed, she should act coquettishly when it was time to act coquettishly. Otherwise, if Boss Missouri turned into a jealous king or something, things would not end well. The little woman's soft and fragrant body was pressed into his embrace. The man glanced at her with a hint of a smile. Is that so? Then can you feel my killing intent? All of a sudden there was a knock on the restroom door. Jinwan's expression turned solemn. She turned toward the door and saw that it had been locked from the inside. Why can't this door be opened? A female student spoke from outside. Perhaps it's broken again? Last week, the cafeteria restroom's lock seemed to have been broken. The school said that they had already found someone to fix it. Perhaps it's broken again? Forget it. Let's go to the school's restroom. The 2 female students pushed against the door but could not open it. In the end they left. Jinwan had just released a sigh of relief when the hand behind her waist suddenly lifted her up. Before she could react, the man abruptly kissed her again. The long and deep kiss made her soften instantly. He pressed the back of her head with one hand and held her slender waist with the other, bringing her forward. This kind of occasion, this kind of place, everything about this man made her want to hold him tightly in her world, not to be taken away by anyone, not to be shared with anyone. She instinctively stuck out her tongue to make a tentative response. The man paused, his eyes darkened inch by inch, and he mercilessly bit the tip of her tongue. The sweetness was stronger than the pain. Jinwan raised her hands to hug the man's neck. In an instant she was lifted up by him, placed on the sink and kissed. When her breathing quickened, he saw the little woman's flushed neck and ears in the mirror behind her. Mo Jingshan's hands were placed on the edge of the sink, encircling her between him and the mirror. He bent down to look at her, his black eyes filled with undisguised aggression. There's still more than a month before you graduate. It seems like I can't leave T-City in the short term, he said slowly and huskily. Keep those people who are seeking death away from you, N? When Jinwan was carried up, her clothes were slightly messy. The little woman was not dressed in the mature professional attire she wore in High City studio. Jinwan was only 21 years old. Her eyes were big and her skin was white. This simple and clean student attire made her appear like a high school student who had yet to reach adulthood. Right now she was sitting in front of him. Her gaze was clean and innocent. Her slightly messy collar was slightly pulled open, revealing her collarbone. The softness hidden under her clothes rose and fell with her breathing. In an instant, he kissed her and her red, translucent lips were exceptionally seductive. Seeing her like this, Mo Jingshan's lower body began to heat up. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he suppressed the desire to press her down here and do it properly. He calmed his breathing and slowly asked, "Must we maintain such a distance in relationship in T University?" "It's not necessary. It doesn't have to be like this. But as you can see, the students here all worship you. There are many girls like Ling Feifei. I still have to study here for more than a month. I don't want to be disturbed by them. In the past, I was always targeted by those rich young ladies in high city. It's not easy for me to live such a low-key and peaceful life. Anyway, I don't have much time left. Just cooperate with me." Jin Wan raised her arms and hugged the man's neck tightly. "You have to know how much weight the words Mo Jingshan's wife carry. I'll instantly become the target of public criticism. With me around, will you be afraid?" "Of course I won't be afraid. But I've seen too many envious, jealous and hateful gazes since I was young. Right now, I'll just treat it as Mrs. Mo visiting T University incognito. Mr. Mo, you have to give me some face and let me play to my heart's content." Jin Wan leaned in and kissed his lips. When the man lowered his eyes to look at her, she said with some pride, "You can't always spend your time on me in T City. There's still a Mo Corporation subsidiary company here. If there's a need, the company's management needs you to meet them. Furthermore, don't you think that if we directly publicize our relationship, it'll be too much to abuse the dogs?" Mo Jingshan snorted. "Your Professor Lin isn't hidden. Professor Lin doesn't matter. He's an old man with high IQ. He knows what to say and what not to say. As for the other school leaders and students, forget it. What's wrong with that roommate of yours?" Mo Jingshan carried Jin Wan down from the slightly wet and cold sink. Men usually did not pay much attention to the small squabbles between women. However, earlier on Ling Feifei had been arguing with Jin Wan and the others. It was clear that their relationship did not seem like that of normal roommates. "She's the one who called to find trouble with me that night. She's only 20 years old, but she behaves like an immature child. She's likely been spoiled by her family. I don't usually bicker with her. You can just ignore her." "Does she always target you?" "Not really. It's just that she feels that I'm the manager of a small studio. She feels it's unfair that I'm living in the same dormitory as her, who's as beautiful as a flower, so she always wants to bully me." The man raised his brows. "It's rare to find someone who has the instinct to bully you." Jin Wan. Chapter 246. The man watched her for a moment before leaning down to press his lips against hers. He used a hoarse and alluring voice to say, "Only I can bully you." Jin Wan, what kind of big truth was he spouting? If she was bullied, wasn't she bullied on the bed? Jin Wan's phone rang. Bai Wei was calling to rush her. "Why aren't you back yet after going to the bathroom for so long? Professor Lin's class is at 1. It's already 12:45. I'll be right there." Jin Wan hung up after speaking. Originally she wanted to leave. However, being held in the man's embrace, Jin Wan raised her head to kiss his chin. "Hubby, you were especially handsome on stage today." Jin Wan smiled brightly. "You were different from your usual handsomeness. Today, in front of a group of young and energetic students, your entire body seemed to be glowing." Mo Jingshan had never heard Jin Wan describe him in such a straightforward manner. His gaze faltered slightly as he looked at her. "In this world, I'm afraid there isn't a man more suited to wear a shirt than you." Jin Wan kissed his chin again. "When you stood there and spoke, it really made one want to tear apart your shirt and pounce on you." The man's handsome brows rose slightly. His gaze was deep as he slowly said, "I'll give you this chance tonight." Jin Wan did have the intention to take the initiative to seduce him. Who asked him to praise his wife in front of others? He was so charming. However, the man's words caused her to immediately break down. Her face was burning as she escaped from his embrace and headed out to open the door. The moment she opened the door, she saw Ling Feifei, who had appeared out of nowhere, staring at Jin Wan with an unhappy expression. She seemed to want to peer into the bathroom behind Jin Wan. "Is CEO Mo here?" Ling Feifei's senses were sharp as she glared at her. Jin Wan walked out, slowly closing the bathroom door behind her. "No. No." Ling Feifei stepped forward. "Earlier, I saw him head this way when he left. This isn't the cafeteria's exit. How could he not be here?" Jin Wan calmly replied, "Earlier he seemed to have passed by here. However, he definitely had to leave after using the bathroom. Could it be that he's staying here to eat?" In the bathroom, Mo Jingshan. She thought that Feng Ling would be back after resting for a few days, But when Jin Wan called to ask, Feng Ling hoarsely said that she might need to rest for a few more days. Jin Wan was worried and directly went to Feng Ling's residence. After knocking for a long time, the door was finally opened. The moment she opened the door, Jin Wan's eyelids twitched. This was the first time she had seen Feng Ling look so haggard and out of sorts. She then noticed that her short hair was slightly messy and hesitated before entering. "What's wrong? Are your injuries any better? Are you sick again or?" "I'm fine. Why are you here?" Feng Ling turned around, avoiding Jin Wan's gaze. However, when Feng Ling turned around, Jin Wan saw that there seemed to be two particularly obvious red marks on Feng Ling's neck. Jin Wan immediately walked over and pulled Feng Ling back. Only then did she see the marks on her neck more clearly. Not only on her neck, but her collar was also slightly pulled open by Jin Wan. Around Feng Ling's collarbone there were scattered marks. Jin Wan naturally recognized these marks. Every time Mo Jingshan lost control in bed and was especially forceful, she would wake up to find such marks on her body. However, Mo Jingshan usually cared about her feelings, so this was rare. Even if there were some marks, there wouldn't be too many. But Feng Ling's, it could be described as having suffered some kind of serious sexual assault. What happened? Jin Wan held her hand to prevent her from turning away. Seeing that Feng Ling's complexion was also very bad, she immediately pushed her to sit on the sofa and looked at her coldly and sternly. "Haven't you been recuperating at home these days? Who was it?" The answer clearly appeared in her mind, but Jin Wan felt that although Nan Heng's background was complicated, he was extremely calm and rational like Mo Jingshan. It shouldn't be possible for him. The answer was obvious in Jin Wan's eyes. Feng Ling looked into her eyes and did not speak or explain. It really was Nan Heng? Jin Wan raised her hand in disbelief to tug at Feng Ling's clothes, but Feng Ling gently pulled her away. "Don't look," she said hoarsely. "When did this happen? Yesterday? Last night? And it was during the day? What exactly did he want to do? He clearly knows that you're injured, yet he still treats you like this? Is he a beast?" Jin Wan was so angry that she almost cursed. She forced herself to control herself to avoid agitating Feng Ling, who appeared to be in a bad condition. Feng Ling did not answer. After a moment of silence she said, "I asked for it. It was my words that agitated him. Otherwise it wouldn't have come to this. I overestimated the way we interact. I can only blame myself. What exactly happened? Regardless of the relationship between the two of you, he can't treat you like this. What does this mean?" Jin Wan pointed at the marks on Feng Ling's neck that appeared to have been bitten. They were not simple hickeys. "This is called abuse. Abuse, do you understand? This is too much." She saw that Feng Ling's complexion was really bad. Furthermore, it seemed like she had just been bullied not too long ago. The room seemed to still be filled with the faint smell of tobacco from before the man left. Jin Wan stood up to open the windows. She suddenly caught a glimpse of the bedroom door. She abruptly walked over and saw the mess on the floor. Feng Ling's clothes were torn and scattered. Almost none of her clothes were intact. They were all thrown on the floor. Jin Wan pursed her lips. She turned to see Feng Ling standing up from the sofa. She seemed to be pouring a glass of water for Jin Wan. She saw that Feng Ling's walking posture was slightly awkward. It was clear that she was in excruciating pain. "You don't need to pour water. I won't drink," Jin Wan said calmly. Jin Wan calmly said, "Feng Ling, Mr. Mo and I are your real employers now. No matter what kind of relationship you had with Nan Heng or what kind of entanglement you had, I don't care. But you're my woman. I can't just watch as my woman is bullied like this." Feng Ling still poured the water and placed the glass down. She then stood by the sofa and raised her eyes to look at Jin Wan. It seemed like she wanted to say something, but her lips moved and she chose to close her mouth. "What do you want to say?" Jin Wan saw that Feng Ling's condition was really bad. Her intuition told her that she wanted her help. Feng Ling's lips moved again. After a long time she forced out a few hoarse words. "Mrs. Mo, can I trouble you to buy a box of birth control pills for me?" That. Chapter 247. This was the first time Jin Wan had bought a contraceptive pill. When she stood in the pharmacy she didn't know what brand to buy. It wasn't until the pharmacy clerk brought her a pink box with only one pill in it that she took a closer look at it. Then her eyes glanced at the medicine counter next to her. "Miss, do you need anything else? Do you have a pregnancy test?" "Yes, please wait a moment. I'll get it for you." When Jin Wan left the pharmacy, she held the contraceptive pills she bought for Feng Ling in one hand and the pregnancy test paper she bought for herself in the other. Although she didn't seem to be pregnant previously, she occasionally showed signs of early pregnancy. However, due to her cold body, she didn't consider whether she would get pregnant soon. Cold body was related to the cold womb. Although it didn't have much effect, the pregnancy rate would definitely be lower. Therefore, Jinwan didn't take the possibility of pregnancy seriously. Since she came to the pharmacy today, she bought a pregnancy test and went back to take it. Returning to Feng Ling's residence, Feng Ling had already showered and changed her clothes. Except for the obvious marks on her neck that couldn't be covered, she looked no different. "Do you want to move to my place these days?" Jinwan handed the medicine to her. She originally wanted to go into the bedroom to help her put away the clothes on the floor, but when she entered, she saw that the floor and bed had been cleaned. Although Feng Ling was used to living with those men, she really liked cleanliness. Today was the first time she saw such a scene. "No, you and COMO haven't been together for more than a month. You'd better enjoy your rare time alone. I'm fine here. I'll go back to school to accompany you after a few days of rest." "I don't need to accompany you, but you can't stay here alone." "What if Nanheng? He just flew to America. He won't come for the time being." Feng Ling's expression was calm. Jinwan slowly frowned. "Flew to America? He just bullied you like this and in the blink of an eye he'll fly back to America?" "Mrs. Mo, I don't want Mr. Mo to know about this matter. Otherwise he might fire me because my matter has affected your mood. I don't plan to return to America, so—" Feng Ling didn't explain but slightly pursed her lips. "Rest well. I won't tell him." Jinwan didn't hesitate at all. Only then did Feng Ling stop talking. She smiled at her, but clearly she was not in the mood to smile. It could be seen that there must be a story between Feng Ling and Nanheng, but Feng Ling did not like to share too much about herself with others. Previously in the condo, Feng Ling was able to talk about some of her past experiences, which could be considered as letting down some of her guard against Jinwan, this employer or friend whom she was increasingly familiar with. However, she clearly did not intend to talk too much about her relationship with Nanheng. Or perhaps, there was something that was too obscure to mention. Jinwan stayed at Feng Ling's place until 7 in the evening before leaving. In the end, she helped Feng Ling apply ice to the bruises on her neck and reminded her to apply ice every hour. After confirming that Feng Ling's mood and condition were stable, she finally left. At night, when Mo Jingshan entered the house, Jinwan had just returned home. When he returned, Jinwan was sitting on the sofa with a pillow in her hand. She was curled up into a ball and covered her eyes with her fingers, leaving only a small gap to look at the television screen. The man approached, his hand landing on her head. The little woman on the sofa immediately shivered. She let out an "ah," and abruptly raised her head to look at him. The fear in her eyes gradually dissipated. "Why did you come back so late? What are you watching?" Mo Jingshan rubbed the top of her head comfortingly, glancing at the television screen from the side. The television was currently showing a horror film that had recently been released. "When I reached home earlier, I realized that you weren't back yet. Recently, I've gotten used to staying in the dormitory. When I was bored, I randomly watched a movie. It just so happened that they were showing a horror film, so I watched it for a while." "With that little bit of courage of yours, when did you become interested in horror films?" "In the past, I always heard others say that it was good, but I never had the chance to watch it. Just now, when the channel changed, I saw it, so I took a few more glances." Jinwan was still hugging the pillow, her face pressed against it. She tilted her head to look at him. "You're indeed busier in T-City than in High City. And I'll be staying in T-City for at least half a month. I'll try to finish my work in the morning and come back earlier to accompany you at night, N?" Seeing that the little woman seemed to have been badly frightened, Mo Jingshan picked up the remote control to turn off the television. He then carried her up, sat on the sofa and placed her on his lap. "If you're not coming back, it's fine if I stay in the dormitory. After all, I've already stayed there for more than a month. I'm already used to it. Your roommate has a very serious brain problem and psychological disorder. It's best if you don't stay there as often." Jinwan almost laughed out loud. A very serious brain problem and psychological disorder? Was he indirectly implying that Ling Feifei was a retard? Her eyes curved. "Humans, will always encounter all kinds of weirdos. This kind of person with a low IQ doesn't pose any threat to me at all. What's there to worry about? It's true that she doesn't pose any threat, but it'll easily lower her IQ." After speaking, Mo Jingshan watched her for a moment before pinching her cheek. "I'll accompany you in T-City for a few more days. After that, when I return to High City, I'll be busy with some overseas cooperation projects. I might have to travel frequently." Jinwan raised her face, blinking. "Have you gotten any new female secretaries by your side recently?" The man pursed his lips. What, are you afraid that an unknown love rival will appear when I'm not by your side? The room was warm. Jinwan wore soft home clothes. Her hair was tied into a bun, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing her fair wrists. She did not wear any unnecessary jewelry. She pursed her lips, hugging the man's neck and pulling him down, forcing him to lower his head to press closer to her. She leaned close to his ear to say, "You're the only one who's dissatisfied with the male students who greet me in school, but I'm not allowed to investigate the enemies around you?" In the past, Jinwan did not mind the gender of the employees in Mo Jingshan's company or around him. However, ever since the incident with Shuyen, she had always minded the position of his secretary. The man's hand was around her waist. Using this position, he leaned down and kissed her twice on the lips. He chuckled softly. "My secretary position is still empty. Mrs. Mo is really worried. Why don't you wait until you've completed your studies in business management, hand over the studio to your best friend, and you can come to work in Mo Corporation? Then Xia Tian will most likely use the reason of valuing love over friendship to cut ties with me for a few days." Chapter 248. After a while, when Jinwan was about to leave his embrace, the man's low and indifferent voice suddenly rang from above her head. "What's that?" Jinwan raised her eyes to meet Mo Jingshan's gaze. She then turned to look at the trash can by the sofa. There was a pink package of pregnancy test paper. It was a very small thing. Earlier, when she threw it away, she had deliberately hidden it. Alas, he still saw it. "Previously, my appetite wasn't good. I was always nauseous and dizzy. Later, my appetite suddenly improved. I can eat and sleep well. Today, when I passed by the pharmacy, I bought a pregnancy test paper to see if I'm pregnant. After the test, I found that I'm not. It should be because I'm not used to the climate in T-City." Jinwan leaned into the man's embrace. "It seems like grandfather's dream of holding a great-grandchild will have to wait." Mo Jingshan glanced at her expression and casually took out the pregnancy test paper from the trash can. He lowered his head to read the instructions and related information on it. After reading it, he directly carried Jinwan up from the sofa. "What are you doing?" Jinwan was suddenly placed on the ground. Her legs landed on the ground and she stood steadily. "Go to the hospital for a check," he said. "The accuracy of this test at home is only 50 to 90%. It's better to go to the hospital for a check to be sure." "There's no need. I haven't been that sleepy these days and I don't feel much nausea. I don't think I'm pregnant. Besides, it's already so late. The hospital only has emergency rooms. The gynecologists and obstetricians aren't around. Even if we go, there won't be a detailed examination. It's already so late and even the blood test doctor isn't around." Mo Jingshan did not plan to be careless with Jinwan's pregnancy. She could tell. She smiled and stood on her tiptoes before him. She held the man's handsome face and kissed him heavily. "I'll definitely take good care of my body. The moment there are any signs of pregnancy, I'll obediently go to the hospital." Mo Jingshan glanced at the pregnancy test paper again. Jinwan decided to show him the test result with only a red line that she had taken with her phone. In the end, Mo Jingshan glanced at the time and did not say anything more. He turned into the kitchen to help her boil brown sugar water. After Jinwan came to T-City without Auntie Chen's supervision, it had been a long time since she drank hot water or brown sugar water at night. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was in the kitchen, Jinwan tidied up the paper basket and turned on the television to find something good to watch. Horror movies were better left alone. After changing a few channels, his phone rang. She took a look. The caller was the secretary manager of the G Corporation, the most capable secretary of her father, Ji Hongwen. After Jinwan came to T-City, she hadn't contacted her family much, and her father hadn't called for a long time. Why would his secretary suddenly call? She picked it up. "Hello." After a few seconds of silence, a familiar voice came from the other side of the phone. It was polite and formal. "Hello, Miss Ji. I'm Secretary Zhou." The other party continued. "Director Ji recently made an appointment with a few old friends to go to T-City for sightseeing. Since Miss Ji is in T-City, he asked me to arrange a time to meet you. Director Ji hasn't seen you in a while. May I know when Miss Ji will be free next week?" "My dad is coming to T-City. Why didn't he call me personally?" Jinwan spoke unhurriedly. "I've never heard of him being close to any of his old friends in T-City before. Now that he's here in T-City for sightseeing in this season? What's so interesting about the cold wind and fallen leaves on the ground?" Director Ji just went to a meeting. Before the meeting, he made this decision with several partners and friends, and then asked me to arrange everything in T-City as soon as possible. I called Miss G as soon as possible. After all, Director G agreed to go to T-City because you're there. This father misses his daughter but is unwilling to say it out loud, so I can only try my best to make the arrangements. Secretary Zhou smiled warmly and said, Chairman G has also discussed a few new collaborations in T-City and invited a few old friends from nearby. Secretary Zhou had worked for Ji Hongwen for many years. This year he was about 34 or 35 years old. He had always been capable and could be regarded as one of her father's capable assistants. However, Secretary Zhou didn't have much contact with Jin Wan and only nodded at her face when they met a few times. However, he did know that Secretary Zhou had worked for the G Corporation for many years. All right, I understand. Thank you, Secretary Zhou. I'll tell you the specific time after I decide. After hanging up the phone, Jin Wan sat on the sofa and stared at the ground in a daze. She didn't know if her father finally dealt with the incident with Shinharu. She understood him, so she didn't rush him. However, Shinharu's existence was definitely a considerable threat to the Ji family. Now that her father suddenly wanted to come to T-City, perhaps she could take the opportunity to have a good talk with him. Several minutes later, Jin Wan's phone beeped with a text message. She subconsciously turned to look at it. It was from Secretary Zhou's number. There was only a simple sentence. Next Wednesday COG will be at T-City's exclusive U Club. If Miss G has enough time you can go there at that time. Jin Wan glanced at it and replied, all right. She was about to call Ji Hongwen and ask him when he would come to T-City. She could pick him up at the airport in advance. However, Secretary Zhou said that Director Ji had just left for a meeting, and her father was usually very busy in the company. Jin Wan was thinking about it when Mo Jingshan brought out the brown sugar water he had prepared for her. Test the temperature. Drink it when it's not hot. Mo Jingshan placed the glass in front of her eyes. Jin Wan picked it up and took a sip. Mo Jingshan had most likely placed it by the window to dry for her. It was no longer particularly hot. She drank some and was about to put it down when the man glanced at her. Drink it all. Jin Wan could only raise the glass and finish it in one gulp. This brown sugar water had some ginger in it. After drinking it, Jin Wan went to take a shower. It had already been an hour, but she could still feel the warmth in her stomach. She was about to close the window before going to bed when the man reached out and pulled her back. He carried her back to the bed. In the future, don't let the wind blow in before going to bed. I'll close it. Every time Mo Jingshan was by her side, he took good care of her. When he laid down, Jin Wan leaned against his chest. She played with the man's hand as she said, your brown sugar water skills are even better than Auntie Chen's. Even if you're only self-sufficient during your time in America, you can't possibly know how to do this. You didn't specially learn it, did you? Chapter 249. The bedside lamp fell. The light was dim, but Jin Wan could still see the man's face clearly. She played with his palm, her fingers poking around in his palm. This is the first time I've heard you talk about your mother. What kind of person is she? To be able to live with Director Mo for a lifetime and obtain grandfather's love, she must be a woman with a high EQ, right? Mo Jingshan raised his brows, holding back a smile. Aren't you the one grandfather likes the most? That time I heard grandfather talk about your mother. From his tone he seemed to admire and like her a lot. I've never interacted with her before. Earlier I heard you say that she likes to study health, so I asked out of curiosity. Jin Wan placed her fingers between his. Their palms were pressed together and their fingers intertwined. She raised her eyes to look at him. The man's expression was calm. Without hesitation he said, she is indeed a good mother, but I've been away from America for too long, and the time I spent by her side was short. After I grew up, I didn't interact much with her. Then will she like me? Yes. Mo Jingshan rubbed her hair. My mother's personality is very open-minded. If she wasn't, she wouldn't have tolerated my father for so many years. As Mo Jingshan spoke, he covered the two of them with the blanket. How much I care about you is how much she likes you. Don't think too much. Go to sleep. Jin Wan raised her chin, asking proudly, you care about me a lot. And I care. The smile on Jin Wan's lips deepened. She leaned closer into his embrace. Under the bedside lamp, her eyes were clear. Then what do you like the most about me? Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her hand. He looked at her fair and clean face. His hand brushed past it, causing a strand of her hair to flutter. Thinking of ways to make me praise you. Aren't you embarrassed in the middle of the night? Mo Jingshan chuckled, kissing her on the lips. Are you still not satisfied after tasting the sweetness I gave you in front of your roommates that day? Jin Wan immediately arched into his embrace. I've never heard you praise me before. Can't I hear you now? He looked at her coquettishly, rubbing against his chest as she spoke, and leaned down to kiss her. Maybe I'm destined to fall in your hands in this life. My heart softens when I see you coquettishly. Oh, then it seemed like she really should act coquettishly in the future. If it weren't for the fact that absence made the heart grow fonder, and if it weren't for the fact that they had just gotten back together, she wouldn't act coquettishly like this. In the end, he touched her face and smiled faintly. Probably because I want to kiss you whenever I see you, no matter when or where. Jin Wan glared at him. Haven't you kissed enough? Yes, quite a lot, but not enough. The man said and kissed her lips again. Jin Wan returned the kiss, panting heavily before she hurriedly called for a stop. I really have a test tomorrow and I can't easily stop this kind of test. I need to conserve my energy. Let me sleep early. All right. Jin Wan had been leaning against his chest since she fell asleep. She was quiet and warm. Mo Jingshan looked at the little woman in his arms. His fingers caressed her hair and landed on her ears, gently caressing them. What did he like about her? Back then, Qin Siding had said that the moment he saw Shi Nianzhe, he knew that he would most likely be entangled with this woman until death. Mo Jingshan's feelings for Jin Wan were most likely not as simple as until death. Ever since that night many years ago when he was dragged ashore by this teenage girl on the Los Angeles River, and when this young girl performed CPR on him in the dark, he was destined to be entangled with her for the rest of his life. At that time, when he was unconscious, he heard her softly muttering while performing CPR, "Don't die, ah. This is the first time I've done something good in my life and also the first time I've performed CPR. Look, I've even given you my first kiss. Please don't die, come back to life." At that time he really could not open his mouth to speak. Otherwise, he would have definitely told her, "Little friend, CPR is not as simple as blowing air inwards, and a first kiss is not as simple as this." 3 days later, to university. The results of the test were out. As expected, hard work pays off. Jin Wan's results were first in Professor Lin's class. Ever since she was young, she had always obtained straight A's in every subject. Even though she was not very serious when she was studying in America, she was still blessed by the heavens when it came to absorbing knowledge. As long as she put in a little more effort, she would be able to memorize better than others and comprehend more thoroughly. Thus, things like tests usually did not pose a problem for her. Just as she was about to head to the school building, Ling Feifei suddenly called out to her from behind. "Jin Wan, you haven't returned to the dormitory for the past few days. Don't tell me you have a man outside of school?" Jin Wan did not even turn back. She calmly replied, "We're not underage children. Don't bother about whether I have a man or not. Even if I do, how is it bothering you?" Ling Feifei rolled her eyes. "Don't think I can't tell. The last time CEO Mo was around, you kept trying to find an opportunity to speak to him. Later on, in the restroom, you must have found an opportunity to meet CEO Mo alone. Do you think that just because you're from High City you can really speak to him? Why don't you take a good look at yourself in the mirror? Do you think you're worthy of him? In this world it's not easy for the mentally handicapped to survive. You haven't even clearly seen your own nature, yet you've already handed a mirror to someone else. Are you afraid that your own face is too ugly and will scare yourself, or are you only capable of seeing others? Have you already reached a state of madness where you forget yourself? Ling Feifei, this is an illness. You have to be treated." Jin Wan chuckled. She ignored Ling Feifei's choked expression and entered the school building unconcernedly. Ling Feifei stood in the same spot, angrily glaring at Jin Wan's back. It was as though she could not wait to use her gaze to pierce a hole through Jin Wan's body. She then picked up her phone to look at the message she had just received. "Feifei, this morning I saw the Jin Wan who used to stay in your dormitory. She actually alighted from CEO Mo's car. Your roommates, you definitely know the inside story. Hurry and tell me, could it be that Jin Wan has hugged onto CEO Mo's thigh?" Ling Feifei once again read the message word by word. Finally, she raised her eyes to look at Jin Wan's direction, but she had already entered. Jin Wan had always maintained her composure. She had always kept everything under wraps and never revealed too much about herself. Could it be that she had secretly taken advantage of her? CEO Mo had already said that he was married. If Jin Wan was bold enough to interfere in someone else's marriage and seduce Mo Jingshan, then she, Ling Feifei, could not blame her for catching hold of her weakness. Chapter 250. Wednesday. Jin Wan got out of the taxi and walked to the door of the luxurious Premium U clubhouse. Before she came, she called Ji Hongwen, but he didn't answer. Then she called Secretary Zhou, who said that Chairman Ji's cell phone was in his coat pocket and he was playing cards and drinking with several old friends. When Jinwan arrived, she saw that the location of the clubhouse was quite good. Although her father was not a particularly low-key person, he usually chose relatively quiet theme clubhouses or antique restaurants that looked very grand. This was the first time he chose such a young place. However, there were too many rich people here, and this was one of the largest clubhouses in T-City. If her father wanted to come here to talk about cooperation or to meet old friends, he had no better place to go, so he chose this place. It was not impossible. When Jinwan arrived, it was already past 7 o'clock in the evening. The clubhouse was not completely lively, and only a few people were walking in. Seeing the waiter standing inside, she was about to ask where room 18 was, but before she could ask, a hand suddenly reached out and held her arm. She turned her eyes sharply, only to see that it was a man in his 30s, dressed in a professional suit. "Are you Miss Ji?" Jinwan looked at him warily. "You are." The man smiled politely. "I was sent by Chairman Ji to pick you up. Chairman Ji is waiting for you in the private room. Just follow me." From the beginning, the person who contacted Jinwan was not her father. Even if Secretary Zhou was trustworthy, he was not as trustworthy as her father. Now the person who came to pick her up was a stranger. Jinwan raised her eyebrows. "Are you sent by Chairman Ji? Did he bring a new assistant to T-City or something? Where is Secretary Zhou?" Her father was not such an unreliable person. Jinwan became more and more vigilant. The man smiled politely and said in a calm tone, "Chairman Ji drank too much. Secretary Zhou is watching him in the private room. I'm Chairman Ji's new assistant. Miss Ji, even if you don't believe me, you should trust Secretary Zhou. She has been in the Ji Corporation for so many years. You can't not trust her. Besides, it's the first time I've met you, and I have no motive to hurt you. Are you worried?" Jinwan didn't speak and looked at the bathroom not far away. "Okay, I came here in a hurry. Can I go to the bathroom to put on lipstick?" "Do you need to touch up your makeup to see your father?" "Of course. My father's old friend is here, isn't he? It's the most basic etiquette to touch up your makeup." The man nodded to her. "Okay. Of course." Jinwan walked quickly into the bathroom with her cell phone in hand and called Mo Jingshan as soon as she entered. The call was quickly picked up. She knew that he was having a meeting at the subsidiary company. Last night, he had said that he had to make a last-minute decision on a project at the subsidiary company tonight. Jinwan rarely called him when she knew he was in a meeting, so Mo Jingshan picked up the phone. "What's up?" The man's low voice came from the phone. Jinwan didn't want the man outside to hear, so she lowered her voice. "I'm in the exclusive U Club. My father's secretary asked me to come here, but I haven't seen my father yet. For now, I'm not sure if there's anything else, but if I don't pick up when you call me 20 minutes later, then there's really something wrong." Before Mo Jingshan could speak again, the man outside had come to the door of the bathroom. Jinwan suddenly put down the phone, hung up the phone, took out a lipstick and casually applied it. She turned to the man waiting outside the door and said, "Let's go. Please lead the way." They took the elevator to the floor of private room 18. The man took her to the innermost private room. When they reached the door, he opened the door and motioned for Jinwan to go in. Although it looked like a private room, there was no sound inside. Jinwan stood at the door and didn't go in. "Isn't my father drinking with a few friends? Is Secretary Zhou also inside? Why is there no sound?" "Chairman Ji is in the next private room. He misses you, Miss Ji, but he knows you don't like this kind of drinking and social occasions. If you go there, you will inevitably be persuaded to drink a few glasses of wine, so he asked you to wait for him here. Miss Ji, don't worry. I'll ask Secretary Zhou when Chairman Ji can come." Jinwan felt it was very interesting. Although Secretary Zhou had worked for the Ji Corporation for many years, it seemed that he was not very reliable. She took a step back and moved away from the door. She could hear someone singing next door and the sound of glasses clinking against each other. "It's fine. My dad has never allowed me to drink since I was young. Many people know that, so it's fine even if I go in." The man hesitated and said, "All right." He turned to go next door, opened the door and said, "Miss Ji, please." Jinwan walked in, but as soon as she entered the door, she saw that there was no one inside at all. There was only a large color screen TV dozens of inches on the wall, showing a cocktail party and karaoke. She turned around abruptly, but the door behind her had closed with a bang. She picked up her cell phone and looked at it. Sure enough, there was no signal in the private room. Whether it was the room next door or this room, the other party knew her too well and specially designed it for her. She was alone in this private room. The lights were bright, the coffee table and sofa were clean, and there was not a bottle of wine. But there was only a cup of steaming tea in the middle of the coffee table, which meant that the person who had been sitting here had just left. Jinwan didn't reach out to touch it. She looked around again, turned to the window and looked out. Although this floor was not particularly high, there was no help outside, so there was no way to get out of here. Secretary Zhou had been with her father for so many years, and he would not easily be swayed. Who on earth had the ability to bribe Secretary Zhou? Suddenly, sleepiness came over her. Jinwan couldn't help yawning, and her head became heavier and heavier. Because she didn't sit down, she immediately shook her head hard because of the weightlessness and woke up from her sleepiness. But her brain was a little muddled. She subconsciously took out her cell phone and looked at the time. She had only been here for 5 minutes and this happened. Sure enough, there was something wrong. Jinwan turned to open the window, but before she got halfway, her body softened and she fell on the sofa. She touched her forehead, and a wave of dizziness came over her. Her head was heavy and her vision was a little blurred. Jinwan clenched her hands, digging her nails deep into her palms to keep herself awake. After experiencing so much, how could she not know this situation? Chapter 251. She was so dizzy that she tried to stand up several times but still fell onto the sofa. She struggled for a while and gave up. She pressed her eyebrows with one hand and picked up her cell phone to check the time with the other. She thought about it in a daze. Mo Jingshan must have heard what she said on the phone earlier, right? Her voice was very low and he was in a meeting. Maybe he didn't hear it clearly. Jinwan bit her lip and kept awake. She didn't know how long it had been. 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 10 minutes. Just as Jinwan's consciousness was getting more and more muddled, suddenly, there was a loud bang from the door of the private room, which woke her up. Jinwan raised her eyes and saw Mo Jingshan coming in. The man looked stern. When he saw Jinwan lying on the sofa, his cold eyes swept around the private room and finally stopped on the teacup on the coffee table. The moment Jinwan saw Mo Jingshan's face, she released a sigh of relief. Feeling the man's approach, it was a familiar and reassuring scent. Her muddled mind instantly cleared up. The man's hand touched her face. After confirming that she was fine, he saw that she was slightly dazed and immediately stood up. Just a few minutes later, the people outside the private room whom Jinwan had never seen before all fell down in front of the door. Jinwan turned to see that Mo Jingshan had opened the window of the private room to let in the wind from outside. She breathed the fresh air outside the window and felt much better. She supported herself to sit up and suddenly heard a text message on her cell phone. Sure enough, there was signal coming in when the door and window were opened. But the text message said that Mo Jingshan had called her 1 minute ago, 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago. In this short period of 10 minutes, Mo Jingshan's phone calls did not stop. Jinwan sobered up, saw the people outside the door, and heard Mo Jingshan's cold voice methodically. I'm not interested in who the person in charge of your club is, but I don't think your boss wants me to know who he is. Then the people who followed Mo Jingshan went to the bathroom on this floor to find a few rags and stuffed the mouths of the people on the ground. At this time, Jinwan's cell phone rang again. When she picked it up, Ji Hongwen's voice was serious as usual. Wan, did you call me before? From his tone, it was obvious that he didn't know what had happened in T-City. Dad, are you in High City or T-City? Jinwan asked. How did you know I was in T-City? Recently, the company has a business partner from T-City. I came over to take a look, but I was in a hurry and didn't have time to visit you. Who told you about this? Where are you now? I'm at the hotel arranged by my business partner. I can't find the time right now. My business partner's car is already waiting downstairs. If I can squeeze out some time before returning to High City, I'll go to T University to see you. Dad, you go ahead with your work. I'm fine. Are you sure? Girl, you rarely call me. My phone was in my pocket and I didn't notice when I pressed the mute button. That's why I saw the missed call. Yes, I'm fine. After speaking without waiting for Ji Hongwen to ask again, Jinwan quickly hung up to prevent him from worrying. The reason why she believed Secretary Zhou's words was that she had texted Ji Hongwen's assistant when she was chatting with Xia Tian over the weekend. She had asked the assistant about Ji Hongwen's recent schedule, and the assistant had confirmed that he indeed had a schedule in T-City. She didn't expect that the person behind the scenes knew everything about the Ji family better than she did and knew who Jinwan often interacted with and trusted. The Ji Corporation's network had always been simple, and Secretary Zhou's actions had always been reassuring. She suddenly felt a chill on her head. Stimulated by the chill, Jinwan instantly sobered up. She raised her head to see the man who was putting a towel wrapped in an ice pack on her head. She subconsciously raised her hand to hold the towel on her head. She had been sitting on the sofa since she received the call and didn't have the strength to get up. She didn't notice when the people who had been restrained in front of the door were taken out. She just looked at the handsome and cold face of the man in front of her. Are you better? Mo Jingshin moved his hand away from her head and watched her compress her head with an ice pack and a towel. Jinwan nodded. Fortunately, I called you in advance. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. At this time there was a noise outside the door. It seemed that the person in charge of the club was called out by Mo Jingshin's men. Mo Jingshin looked at her for a while and touched her head. It's all right. Leave when you're sober. We'll talk about it when we get back. Jinwan responded with an N. Right now, although she did not have much strength in her body, the fresh air in the private room and the chill on her head allowed her to regain a clear mind. Jinwan briefly told him about the call she received from Secretary Zhou and what happened after she came here today. Mo Jingshin looked at her and said flatly, someone can bribe Secretary Zhou and trick you into coming here in the name of your father. Ji Minggran, Secretary Zhou, Shinharu or someone else. I'll find out who it is. Who do you think it is? The sound outside had gone far away. Jinwan couldn't hear how Mo Jingshin's men were going to deal with this club, but she didn't think they would let it go so easily. Mo Jingshin touched her cold forehead again to prevent her from harming her body. He took the towel and ice pack from her hands and threw them on the coffee table. The Ji family is only so big. If it's not the old, then it's the young. Who else could it be? Stay here. When you feel better, wait for me. I'm going to solve the problem of this club. With that, he asked her to sit down on the sofa, took off his suit jacket and put it on her. He patted her shoulder reassuringly and then closed the door and went out. The men in black suits were Mo Jingshin's men. They had called up the list of all the private rooms booked here from the person in charge of the club. When they saw Mo Jingshin coming out, they handed the list to him. Not long after, the young girl hiding in a private room not far away was taken out. When she was dragged out, she was still cursing and struggling. When she turned to see the man who was unbuttoning his shirt and pacing towards her, her expression froze. Perhaps because she never wanted to do too much in front of Mo Jingshin, Ji Minggran didn't expect that Mo Jingshin would come in such a short time. The man's cold eyes fell on her face. He clearly didn't look surprised at Ji Minggran who had just been caught. As soon as her eyes met Mo Jingshin's, Ji Minggran froze. Pressed by the men in black suits in the corridor, it took her more than 10 seconds to come to herself. Brother Jingshin? Ji Minggran's face turned pale. Why are you here? Chapter 252. Mo Jingshin stood there. He had given his suit jacket to Jinwan, and he only wore a black shirt inside. He stood calmly and indifferently. He only glanced at her coldly before turning to speak to his subordinates. He did not look at Ji Minggran again. Call the mastermind behind you out. When Mo Jingshin finally looked at her, his tone was cold and indifferent. It was clear that he did not intend to say a single word to her. Ji Minggran was already used to his coldness and arrogance. Now that she was pressed down by his men and couldn't move, she was instantly angered. She glared at him. What mastermind? I've been going against Jinwan for a long time. What mastermind could I have? Isn't the mastermind me? Isn't that how you guys usually look at me? Ji Minggran's emotions were a little agitated. When she spoke, she was almost roaring. However, the man standing in front of her remained calm and indifferent without the slightest reaction. She instantly felt that she would forever be a dancing clown in front of him. Ji Minggran's embarrassment turned into anger. I just can't stand Jinwan. I just don't like to see the two of you pretending to be happy together without any qualms. Since you've caught him, you can do whatever you want with him. She was relying on her identity as Jinwan's biological sister and the fact that Ji Hongwen and the Ji family were still around. Mo Jingshin would not lay a hand on her, let alone kill her. Mo Jingshin glanced at her indifferently. To be able to use you as a gun, how long has that person been unable to do anything to Jinwan? How could he let a smart woman like you stand out to make trouble? Mo Jingshin. Ji Minggran instantly felt as if she had been insulted and said angrily, do you know how much I like you? Is it wrong that I like you? But you've never been stingy enough to look at me. Since it was a marriage alliance, why did the Ji family and the Mo family choose Jinwan? Where am I lacking? I can't accept it, so I wanted to use Jinwan's unwillingness to be with you as an excuse to find an opportunity to get close to you. The person who denied your marriage was Jinwan. Back then, the one who did not know how to cherish was also Jinwan. But you've been protecting her all along. Why did you treat her so well from the moment you married her? Why can I only watch from afar? Where am I lacking? Mo Jingshin's smile was cold and clear. You're far from it. You? Ji Minggran bit her lower lip angrily and glanced at the men around her. She opened her mouth and said to the man who was a few meters away from her, "Ha, far from it? She is indeed far worse than me. If it was just a marriage between the Ji and Mo families, Jinwan wouldn't be worthy at all. She's not even my father's blood relative." All of a sudden, the door to the private room behind Mo Jingshin opened. Jinwan walked out and approached quickly. But there was a loud slap. Even the men in black suits who were used to being calm all the time turned to look at her. Mo Jingshin's calm gaze landed on Ji Mingran's reddened face. His cold and indifferent gaze did not contain the slightest bit of warmth. Ji Minggran could not believe that she had actually been hit by Jinwan again. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Ji Mingran's nails, which she had just done half a month ago, dug into her palms. She glared at Jinwan. "Jinwan, the slap you gave me before, I'll definitely return it to you tenfold, 100-fold. Don't even think about having peace in this lifetime." When had she, Ji Minggran, ever been stepped on like this? Back then at the Ji family in front of her father, it was fine if Jinwan dared to hit her. But now she actually dared to hit her in front of Mo Jingshin. In the past, in front of Mo Jingshin, she would at most be ridiculed. Ji Minggran immediately exploded. Like a shrew, she struggled to break free from the men's hands and pounced toward Jinwan. Her stance was clearly even fiercer than when she was at the Ji family in High City. Just as Ji Minggran was struggling too hard and was screaming in pain from being held down by the men, a figure suddenly appeared by the elevator. Seeing the figure approaching, Jinwan instantly frowned. At the same time, Ji Minggran was pulled back by the person who approached and fell into the man's chest. However, the man did not gently press her down and did not allow her to struggle. At the same time, the man's sharp eyes swept the corridor and did not linger on Jinwan's face. In the end, because of Mo Jingshin's cold gaze, his eyes were stopped in the air. It was indeed Sheng Yihan. From the moment she saw the cup of tea on the coffee table, Jinwan had guessed it. Sheng Yihan had been a doctor for many years. He usually did not drink coffee or drinks with any flavorings. He preferred tea, especially the kind that was not strong and was very light. Meeting Mo Jingshin's gaze, Sheng Yihan's lips curved into a smile. He exerted more strength in his hands and restrained Ji Minggran, who was still desperately pouncing toward Jinwan. Ji Minggran felt pain. This man almost broke her ribs, but he did not allow her to touch Jinwan. The stinging pain was unbearable. Her eyes immediately turned red and she screamed, "Brother Sheng, let go of me. It's not the first time that Jinwan has hit me. What right does she have? She's just a bastard who doesn't even know who her biological father is. Let go." Ji Mingran's wrist was suddenly grabbed. The pain almost made her tears fall. Although Sheng Yihan's action was to hold Ji Minggran in his arms, anyone could see that Ji Minggran was really in pain from his grip. He was indifferent to Ji Mingran's cries and screams in his arms. Instead, he raised his eyelids to look at Mo Jingshin in the light of the corridor. This was a man who looked elegant and indifferent but in fact almost broke the ribs of the woman in his arms. He looked noble, gentle, and meticulous. His handsome features did not reveal any violent emotions, but Jinwan felt a chill in her bones just by looking at him. It was just like when she was young. When she was young in the Ji family, he had a smile on his face, but he had forced her step by step. Facing Sheng Yihan's deliberate stare, Mo Jingshin glanced at him mildly and said unhurriedly, "The blade you chose isn't sharp enough. You can only blame yourself for having poor taste. Even if you want to break her on the spot, the result will be the same. It's fine if you spill blood in front of me, but in front of Jinwan, I advise you to restrain yourself. Don't scare my wife." Ji Minggran immediately looked at Sheng Yihan helplessly. That night, when she was thrown by Jinwan and Feng Ling in that haunted, abandoned area, it was Sheng Yihan's car that stopped in front of her. But now, what did his words mean? Chapter 253. Sheng Yihan smiled mockingly. "Siumo," his brows were tinged with mockery. "I thought Jinwan still had that female bodyguard by her side." As he spoke, he released Ji Mingran's hand that was about to break her bones and let go of the person in his arms without pity. His hand dropped down. Mo Jingshin calmly glanced at him and then at Ji Minggran, whose face was pale from the pain and who appeared to be deep in thought due to the current situation. Ji Minggran shrunk her shoulders, speaking with some dissatisfaction. "Brother Sheng, I know I was rash and didn't follow your original plan. But the matter between Jinwan and I really can't be resolved with just a few words. I originally wanted to use Dad's name to trick her over. I know you didn't expect her to actually come here. I didn't want to drag you down with me, But, Sheng Yihan looked at her indifferently. What's the use of saying these to get me off the hook at this time? His voice was flat and emotionless. From the beginning, although Sheng Yihan had the intention to help her, he definitely didn't want to drug Jin Wan or lure her here in such a simple way. Ji Minggran was indeed eager for quick success. Sheng Yihan was a very patient person, but Ji Minggran couldn't wait any longer. Jin Wan drawled her tone lightly. So, I was called to this place in the middle of the night. Do you have other plans besides this sister who has always disliked me and wants to hurt me? Facing Jin Wan's cold question, Sheng Yihan raised his eyelids, and his eyes were pale and transparent. He didn't answer Jin Wan's words but just looked expressionlessly at the elegant man standing under the light. On the night when Jin Wan was at Shine's dinner party, Sheng Yihan had already met Mo Jingshan face to face. At that time, their cold eyes had already determined that today's ending would not be too peaceful. I don't have other plans. Between me and you, do I need to have a plan? Sheng Yihan asked with a faint smile. His expression was unfathomable and annoying. Ji Minggran was unwilling to be ignored. She suddenly turned sideways and looked arrogantly at Jin Wan. You should have heard what I said just now. Jin Wan, you are not the daughter of the Ji family at all. Mom only married Dad after she was pregnant with you. Even if the marriage between them is real, even if you have been wearing the hat of the eldest miss of the Ji family for many years, the blood flowing from your upper body is not the blood of our Ji family. You used to be as proud as you are now. Jin Wan, for the sake of the fact that we've been sisters all these years, I don't care how many things you've taken from the Ji family that belong to me, but who do you think you are in the alliance between the Ji family and the Mo family? What right do you have to stand here and call yourself Mrs. Mo? Aren't you the one who should be ashamed of your inferiority? Although Ji Minggran's eyes were slightly red, her words were spoken with an extremely disdainful smile. She carried the bone-deep arrogance of the Ji family's true young lady as she coldly glanced at Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan did not look at Ji Minggran but brought Jin Wan, whose expression was unclear, behind him. He then turned to Sheng Yihan and said mildly, the secret that Ji Hongwen hid for so many years was easily discovered by you when you were in the Ji family. Now this secret that can't be considered a secret can only be used by Ji Minggran as a trump card. The reason you prepared for a long time as bait failed to become Jin Wan's bait and instead lured Ji Minggran? Sheng Yihan sneered, but his smile did not reach his eyes. Since it can't be considered a secret, how can it be considered as bait? Mo Jingshan looked at him for a while and then turned his head to look at Jin Wan. After hearing Ji Minggran's words, Jin Wan did not speak. Or rather, whether it was the rumor that she was an illegitimate daughter among the socialites in High City or the fact that she grew up and gradually found that her facial features were not similar to anyone in the Ji family, she had long been aware of all this in her heart. Although she could not digest it now, at least she was not particularly shocked. Mo Jingshan was right. Ji Minggran was really stupid to think that this was a trump card against her. If Jin Wan was still the Jin Wan who relied on the Ji family in her previous life, she might find it hard to accept it. After all, the present was different from the past. No matter what the truth was, Jin Wan did not rely on the Ji family at all. What she had was only gratitude to Ji Hongwen and the father-daughter relationship that she could not bear to part with. Looking at Ji Minggran's arrogant eyes again, Jin Wan's eyes filled with a faint, calm and cold smile. Maybe it's because I've never deliberately held on to what you value, so your self-righteousness can only comfort you in your heart. What else can it do? Ji Minggran's eyes narrowed. She took the opportunity to raise her voice to ask, in that case, you've never deliberately held on to your marriage with Mo Jingshan? Jin Wan glanced at her, her gaze clear. It's precisely because this marriage is the only thing I've ever held on to, and the only thing I've ever fought for is the man you've always wanted but couldn't get, that you hate me to this extent. You've disregarded our 20-year sisterhood, plotted against me, and even tried to kill me several times? You don't even know who your biological father is. Who gave you the confidence to stand here and say? Ji Minggran was about to retort, but Mo Jingshan had already held Jin Wan's hand. Without looking at anyone in the corridor, he walked toward the private room behind him. The private room door opened and closed and Jin Wan was forced to enter. She raised her eyes to see the man's thin lips pursed into a straight line. He softly called out to her, Nuan Wan. Jin Wan's heart, which had been wavering and unable to calm down, immediately calmed down. She opened her mouth, her voice cool and calm. My ability to withstand blows is better than you think. I'm fine. It's just that some things need time to digest. Mo Jingshan stared at her. Don't listen to anyone's nonsense about your birth. Find a chance to have a good talk with your father. The truth will never be as simple as what others say. Jinwan nodded. He raised his hand to touch her hair, gentle and indifferent. You were drugged earlier. It's not suitable for you to speak too much with them. We'll talk about this when we get back. Jinwan nodded again. She was not at a loss, but at such a time she still listened to Mo Jingshan's arrangements. After all, he was considerate of her emotions. Coincidentally, she did not wish to be at daggers drawn with Ji Menggran. Although she did not feel much, her body was still weak. She allowed him to hold her, but did not let her go out. Chapter 254. After that, Jinwan didn't know what happened outside. More than 10 minutes later, Mo Jingshan came back and took her away. Most of the people in the corridor had left. Jinwan was wearing Mo Jingshan's suit. She heard the man whisper in her ear, "Don't say anything. Just go." However, for some reason, although Ji Menggran stood there biting her lips and did not speak, it was clear from her eyes that she hated Jinwan to the extreme. In the end, in front of Mo Jingshan, she didn't dare to act rashly. At this moment she was like a clown, gritting her teeth and glaring at Mo Jingshan. Jinwan brushed past her. The two women seemed to be calm, but the scene was like an oppressive tsunami. As soon as she walked past Ji Menggran, Jinwan suddenly stopped and looked at her flatly. "So, Menggran, we don't even have a biological sister relationship anymore, do we?" Even if what she said was true, that her mother married into the family after she was pregnant with Jinwan, so her biological father was not Ji Hongwen, even if they had the same mother but different father and were related by blood, even that had been cut in half. When Jinwan said this, there was no expression on her face, but her dark eyes and eyes made people dare not look at her, especially those who were guilty. "When did you treat me as your biological sister?" Ji Menggran was very guilty, but she still straightened her back. Seeing Jinwan didn't speak, Ji Menggran was about to speak, but suddenly Sheng Yihan gave her a lukewarm look, and she immediately bit her lip. Jinwan curved her lips, smiling expressionlessly. "Indeed, you've never treated me as your biological sister. In this world, even the closest people can be separated just like that. Even blood relations can be changed just like that. Then from now on, Menggran, I won't be polite anymore." You. Not understanding what Jinwan meant by her casual words, she was worried that Sheng Yihan would really be angry and refuse to help her after returning to High City, so she didn't dare to go too far in front of him. Ji Menggran stared at Jinwan's back. It was a very light and calm sentence, but it made her feel an inexplicable chill in her heart. Mo Jingshan looked at Jinwan through the light in the corridor. As she walked out, she seemed to let go of something she had been hesitating to grasp. He narrowed his eyes and said coldly to the people behind him, "Send second Miss Ji to Chairman Ji. As outsiders, the Sheng family shouldn't interfere in this kind of family trifles." Mo Jingshan's gaze only lightly swept over Sheng Yihan's smiling face. The corridor was quiet. "No, I'm not going to Dad. I'm going with Brother Sheng." "Shut up," Mo Jingshan said in a low and heavy voice. His cold eyes swept by silently and intimidatingly. Ji Menggran's shoulders shrank. Mo Jingshan's cell phone vibrated. He took it out, took a look at it expressionlessly and then quickly answered, "What's the matter?" She didn't know what the other end said, but his voice was still flat and emotionless. "I see." After a simple conversation, he hung up the phone. Jinwan had been waiting in the car outside the club. Mo Jingshan opened the car door, only to see the little woman wrapped in his suit sitting in the front passenger seat. Her eyes were fixed on her cell phone, but her fingers were sliding back and forth on the screen of the cell phone. She didn't look at anything seriously. "Do you need me to accompany you to see Chairman Ji?" Mo Jingshan stared at her face and said flatly, "Only he can give you the most accurate answer to the questions in your heart." "Forget it. My father came here because of the invitation of a business partner. If he can spare time, he will come to see me. He doesn't want to talk about these old things and I won't force him to talk about them. But no matter what, his feelings for me over these years are real. So what if we are blood relatives? After all, he treats me as his own daughter. If I ask him now, it will only hurt his heart." Jinwan put down the cell phone and did not really call Ji Hongwen. Mo Jingshan's hand fell on her head. "It's good that you're open-minded. These things won't affect your future life. Don't think too much. The truth will come to the surface. I'm here for everything in?" Jinwan suddenly glanced at him. "Then is the person you want to marry the Ji family's daughter or, it's you?" Mo Jingshan interrupted her. "It has nothing to do with your surname." Although she knew he would say this, perhaps women were like this. They would only feel happy when he said it. Therefore Jinwan immediately grinned, satisfied like a child. On the way back, Jinwan looked at the neon lights passing by outside the car and said, I was wondering how Ji Minggran could have bribed Secretary Zhou. Even if she could get in touch with Secretary Zhou, she couldn't have bribed this powerful club in T-City. She couldn't have extended her influence to such a big club in T-City. Now it seems that I was right. When Sheng Yihan left the Ji family, he had already set his eyes on the Ji family. When he returned to the Sheng family, the first thing he wanted to do was to swallow the Ji family. Now Ji Minggran must have been seriously brainwashed by him. Even if she was sold by him, she would still happily count the money for him. It's not you who will be sold. The current situation of the Ji family has nothing to do with you. Hearing the man's words, Jinwan subconsciously turned to look at him. Mo Jingshan stared ahead and drove carefully. Because of her gaze, he held the steering wheel with one hand and put down the other to hold her hand. Don't you want to see the Ji family being swallowed by the Sheng family? I don't care about others, but my father has never owed me anything. Since I was a child, although he is a strict father, he has always been a good father. Jinwan didn't say more, but in her heart she still insisted on the original idea. No matter what happened to the Ji family, she couldn't watch Ji Hongwen get into trouble again. Even if he was not her biological son, the relationship between father and daughter didn't necessarily have to be related by blood. Ji Hongwen was a good father and that was enough. Besides, there were still a lot of things to ask, so she couldn't make a conclusion so easily. The car stopped at a traffic light intersection. Mo Jingshan took a look at her and said calmly, all right. Although it was a very simple word, Jinwan instantly felt as if she had taken a dose of tranquilizer. No matter how powerful the Sheng family was now, if Mo Jingshan didn't allow anything to happen to the Ji family, even 10 Sheng families might not be able to swallow the Ji family. Until the car stopped at the gate of a hospital in T-City. Get out of the car. Jinwan was almost asleep in the car. Hearing the man's voice, she raised her eyes and looked out. Why did you bring me to the hospital? The man unfastened his seat belt and casually answered her question. The pregnancy test you gave last time has expired. Don't you know it? Jinwan immediately sobered up. She sat up straight and looked at the hospital by the roadside in surprise. Has it expired? Chapter 255. Miss G, your so-called body cold syndrome is medically known as uterine deficiency cold, which is also known as uterine cold. This condition will indeed affect the probability of pregnancy, but your condition is not hereditary, and your menstrual period is very accurate. As long as you take care of it properly for a period of time, there will be no problem. Speaking up to this point, the doctor cautiously asked, Miss G, because this symptom of yours is not inherited, I'm very curious as to what caused your body to suffer from such a severe cold. Maybe if we find out the reason, we can cure the disease completely and save more time. How did she suffer from the cold? Jinwan didn't want to mention those things in front of Mo Jingshan, but now he had brought her for examination. Although Mo Jingshan had never asked her about these things, facing the problem of having a baby with him in the future, Jinwan had to admit that she couldn't be careless. She turned to look at the chin of the man beside her, and after a moment of silence she answered, The winter when I was 15 was very cold, and it was even colder in the month before the spring festival. That night it was about -20 degrees. I was on my period, but because of an unexpected incident, I ran out barefoot in my pajamas and squatted in the snow alone all night. Then I was so cold that I couldn't think clearly. In order to stay awake, I grabbed some snow from the ground and ate it. The doctors in the consulting room looked at her in surprise. Jinwan didn't look at them. Before the doctor asked, the man's eyes had turned to her. Their eyes met, and Jinwan saw the silent emotion in the man's eyes. She knew that sooner or later he would know what she had hidden for so many years. The doctor asked her to lie down and re-examined her again. When they walked out of the consulting room, Jinwan was still reading the diagnosis. It was not a serious problem, but she would need to drink Chinese medicine for 2 months to adjust. Mo Jingshan took her to the pharmacy to get the Chinese medicine. While waiting for the Chinese medicine to be boiled, he took her to a quiet VIP waiting room where no one would disturb her. When Jinwan sat down, he pulled a chair for her and put aside the coat she had taken off. His low voice was filled with infinite tolerance and concern. Are you cold? Put on the coat. I'll buy a hot drink. Jinwan looked at the man's handsome face and shook her head. I'm not cold or thirsty. Then she paused and said, I told the doctor the truth just now. Why didn't you ask anything? The man's clear voice was indifferent. If you don't want to say it, why should I ask? Those old matters are just like the relationship between you and the Ji family. There's no need to cling to them. They have nothing to do with your future life. Let the things buried deep in your memories rot away. There's no need to pick up the unnecessary vines that need to be cleaned up. Do you know? He smiled faintly. How tight-lipped do you think Ji Mengran will be? Jin Wan? In that case there were indeed no secrets. Jin Wan supported her chin with one hand and looked at the doctors who were preparing medicine in the pharmacy across the street. She whispered, there are too many embellishments in her words, but you've heard her embellishments, so I really have nothing to hide. So it's all true? Mo Jingshan looked at the little woman sitting there with her chin in her hand. The winter when I was 15 was really cold. I don't want to remember that kind of cold for the rest of my life, Jin Wan said softly. Jin Wan said softly, that year my father had just brought Shin Haru into the family, and Sheng Yihan followed his mother into the Ji family. Although I was arrogant and didn't get along well with them at home, because my father insisted that Shin Haru and Sheng Yihan stay in the Ji family as a child, I couldn't say or do anything. At most, I dropped my things for a few days and left it at that. Sheng Yihan is 4 years older than me. When I was 15 I was also ignorant and curious about love. I don't even know when he began to pay attention to me. In his words, it was probably because he had his first awakening of love, and he opened his eyes to me, his stepsister. Jin Wan paused and looked at Mo Jingshan's faintly raised brows. She knew that this was the first time she had analyzed her absurd past that could not be considered as her first love. It was indeed harsh to his ears, but at least he was listening patiently. The more I ignored him, the better he treated me. In several months he bought me countless such gifts, most of which were to make me, his sister, happy. Later, I became less wary of him and no longer kept him at arm's length. He also gave me a reader's souvenir from abroad. I liked it very much, so I reconciled with him in the way of a child. Later, Ji Mengran said that some of the things at home were given to me by brother Sheng. The servants put them away, but Ji Mengran used them to try to drive a wedge between us. That spring festival, Dad and Shin Haru took Ji Mengran to visit relatives and friends in a neighboring city. I didn't go because my period had a stomachache and I was alone at home. The servants also returned home early because someone in the family fell ill. When Jin Wan said this, she suddenly clenched her sleeves. I didn't expect Sheng Yihan to come back that night. I had just taken a shower and changed into pajamas. I was going to look for snacks, but I ran into Sheng Yihan, who suddenly came in. When he came in, he smelled of alcohol, very strongly of alcohol. Seeing Jin Wan's movements, Mo Jingshan reached out to hold her hand. That's enough. Don't talk about it. Feeling the warmth of his palm, Jin Wan said, it's all right. You said that these are things that should be buried deep in my memories and rotted away. I'm saying it now to cut off all the rotten roots. She raised her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan. Who would have thought that the seemingly glamorous and enviable Miss Ji was almost raped by her stepmother's son at home when she was 15 years old? Although I grabbed the ashtray on the coffee table and smashed it against him, I was still frightened. Fearing that he would wake up, I ran outside. It was very dark at that time, and I didn't dare to run out of the Ji family's yard because I was wearing too little, so I hid barefoot under the old locust tree at the back and hid there all night. Chapter 256. Even though my struggle was effective and nothing irreparable happened, even though he stayed outside my ward for 3 whole days after he regained consciousness, even though he didn't eat or drink during the 48 hours I was in critical condition, and even though I was unconscious for several days, to me the damage he caused was irreparable. So what if he was drunk at the time? That's not a reason. Jin Wan said flatly, my father was furious about this. At first, he admired this stepson and didn't mind that he was the Sheng family's illegitimate son. But after that incident, the Ji family had no place for Sheng Yihan. Shin Haru also expressed that she wanted to sever the mother-son relationship. I stayed in the hospital for 2 months before I returned home. To uphold justice for me, my father kicked Sheng Yihan out of the Ji family in front of me. At that time, Mengran cried and said that brother Sheng was drunk and didn't do it on purpose. She even tried to plead for him, but my father was really furious. He even warned Shin Haru that if she dared to have any contact with this son again, he would kick her out of the Ji family as well. In order not to let this shadow haunt me, my father made Sheng Yihan's name a taboo in the Ji family. No one dared to mention it. Later, I went to America to study and broaden my horizons. I didn't think about those things anymore. If it weren't for the heavy cold in my body, I wouldn't be so afraid of the cold now. I've always been very healthy. When she said the words, very healthy, to Mo Jingshan, she sounded a little aggrieved. Mo Jingshan looked at her expression and raised his hand to pinch her cheek. I didn't say anything bad about you. You should be thankful that what happened when you were a teenager didn't leave too much of a shadow in your life. What else did Menggran tell you except that I had a brief ambiguous period with Sheng Yihan when I was 15? What else could she say? As you think she exaggerated the truth. Why didn't you ask me? The truth filtered out from her exaggerated words was the embarrassing thing you encountered when you were a teenager. If you didn't say it, why would I ask? Would I personally peel open your wound and ask you if it hurt? Do you think I'm that free? This sounded very cold-blooded, but it also seemed to be the most considerate way for her. Jin Wan suddenly puffed up her cheeks unhappily. She leaned against Mo Jingshan's shoulder to say, "No wonder Ji Menggran always speaks so confidently. No wonder she's always unconvinced because you treat me too well." It turns out that her mouth has long been dishonest. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. "I've never seen her alone. Don't let your imagination run wild. Why would she need to meet him alone? With her all-pervasive personality, she doesn't even need to meet me to slander me." Speaking of this, she remembered that Sheng Yihan had given her a watch last time. She looked up at him. "So you knew I didn't take the watch last time, didn't you?" The man stared at her. "He knew that you wouldn't accept it, but he still gave it to you. The meaning of the watch is the bridge of lovers? Who do you think he was trying to disgust?" "That's true, Nuanyuan." He suddenly called her name. "In the future, if he meets you again or if he has any suspicious movements, tell me directly. Don't bear it alone. What did you guys talk about outside today? Will he still look for me? I just want you to remember just in case." Jin Wan looked at his handsome face. She pursed her lips for a long time and suddenly kissed his chin. "Why do you sound so calm when you hear that I was almost raped when I was young? Shouldn't you be extremely angry and want to kill someone right now? That's how it is in the movies. Even if I've already hacked him into pieces in my heart, what has already happened cannot be stopped." Mo Jingshan patted the top of her head. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of coldness hidden in it. "Don't be anxious. I'll get it back for you one by one." Jin Wan suddenly smiled. She hugged him with both hands in his embrace. "My dear hubby. I love you," Jin Wan said seriously in his embrace. The last time she said this, she was acting coquettishly. This time she really said it from the bottom of her heart. The man smiled and reached out to hug her. He touched her head and chuckled softly. "I didn't ask you to come to T-City. I didn't see any results, but you've learned how to confess." At this moment, the doctor from the pharmacy came over to check the list of Chinese medicine. Mo Jingshan had Jin Wan sit there and got up to negotiate with the doctor. 4 hours later, it was already midnight. He finally got the decocted medicine and drove back to the condo. Mo Jingshan really did not let him handle the torture of waiting in the hospital. Jin Wan did not have to worry at all. She sat in the waiting room and slept for a while before taking the car home. After returning home, the man coaxed her to drink the medicine. At 1 o'clock in the morning, she drowsily held the bowl and drank it. It was so bitter that she almost cried. When she raised her eyes, she saw Mo Jingshan watching her. It was clear that if she dared to spit out a mouthful, he would take out another bag of medicine for her to drink. In the end, Mo Jingshan saw that she pinched her nose and drank the entire bowl of medicine. The color in his eyes warmed. "That's good. Go take a shower and sleep." Jin Wan finally got it. She climbed onto the bed and lifted the quilt to sleep. However, in her sleep, she felt a warmth from the soles of her feet. She woke up in a daze and saw the man holding her curled-up body in his arms. At the same time, he held both her feet in his palm. The temperature of his palm was very warm. "What are you doing?" She was still sleepy and asked vaguely. "Let me hug you in." In the future, if your hands and feet are cold, just tell me. There will be something specially prepared for you at home." The man gazed deeply at her half-asleep appearance. Every time this little woman woke up in the middle of sleep, her drowsy appearance was especially tempting. His Adam's apple moved up and down. When she nodded with an N in response, he bent down to kiss her brows. 2 words came out of his throat: "Go to sleep." Mo Jingshan would be staying in T-City for half a month. During this time, Jin Wan had no chance to return to the dormitory. Of course, it could also be said that she had no intention of returning to the dormitory. After Boss Missouri returned to the condo after work, the first thing he did was to cook for her. This was a treatment that she did not receive even when they were in High City. However, it was impossible for Mo Jingshan to personally buy the ingredients. The ingredients were all delivered by the auntie he hired every day. He would wash them in the kitchen and leave them in the kitchen. Chapter 257. On this side, Jin Wan ran back and forth to help Mo Jingshan. Previously, she thought she could keep this man's stomach with her cooking skills. but now she was kept by him. Do you want a plate? Do you still have vegetables to wash? Do you want to cut the ginger for you? What about garlic? Do you want it? She was doing all these chores now and she had forced herself to do it. Otherwise, Mo Jingshan would basically let her sit on the sofa and watch TV, not allowing her to touch anything. She really felt bad, so she ran over to help him. During the meal, Mo Jingshan glanced at Jin Wan, who was enjoying the food with her cheeks puffed up, saying, "This weekend, several leaders from T-City's Teaching Tools Bureau have an appointment with the leaders of T University. I've been pushing this dinner away for several days, but I still can't turn it down. Do you want to go with me?" School leaders? If I go, won't I be exposed? The school leaders are different from your classmates. After knowing you are Mrs. Mo, they will be tight-lipped. You don't have to worry about this. I'll think about it. You still need to think about it? Your principal has already prepared to bring his daughter, who has just graduated with a master's degree, to this dinner. He has introduced his daughter to me several times. Are you sure you don't want to go? Why are you glaring at me? Mo Jingshan, don't you think you have too many rotten peach blossoms? Which rotten peach blossoms have I seen too many? Jin Wan chewed hard in her mouth, realizing that if she hadn't insisted on coming to T University, Mo Jingshan would not have been so close to T University. If he hadn't approached the principal, he wouldn't have been delusional enough to introduce his own daughter to him. But in the end, wasn't it because he was too attractive to women? Tiske, she really wished he could be like some religious people who covered their entire body and only revealed a pair of eyes to walk the world. Perhaps then he would attract fewer peach blossoms. If I go, do I have to introduce myself? Do you think I'm a new student? What if the principal sees me and chases me away as a student? If they ask me who I am, what should I say? My wife. Do you have to be so direct? Mo Jingshan glanced at her. What do you think I want to do? You want me to fight 300 rounds with the principal's daughter? Jin Wan raised her brows. You think too highly of me. Mo Jingshan chuckled. Your principal only has this intention, but he didn't say it clearly. It's just a meeting. After seeing the situation clearly, he won't force it. It's just an ordinary social event. Mrs. Mo, are you too embarrassed to go? What's there to be embarrassed about? So are you going or not? Jin Wan put down the bowl and exhaled. Go. You found a husband yourself. No matter what, you have to keep him in your pocket. You can't give him any chance to cheat. Ahem, I mean we can't give others the chance to dream. The weekend dinner was right after Jin Wan's class. During the day, Professor Lin had specially emphasized that he was busy tonight and that if the students had any questions, they could call him the next day. It was obvious that Professor Lin would be there tonight. Although it was a social event, these people were from the Teaching Tools Bureau and the school leaders, and the way they treated them was very formal. They chose a good hotel for dinner instead of those messy entertainment clubs. Seeing that it was almost time, the principal of T University finally persuaded his daughter to come. The school leaders and the people from the Education Bureau were all looking forward to Mo Jingshan's arrival. Mo Jingshan arrived at the hotel at 7:30 on time. When he pushed the door open and came in, the dozen or so people in the hotel room all looked at him and then subconsciously glanced at Jin Wan behind him. They didn't expect that CEO Mo not only came today but also brought another girl. And she was a very beautiful girl. She had long straight black hair, white skin, big eyes, narrow eyelashes, a fair and beautiful oval face and a well-proportioned figure. She was wearing a casual dress that had no brand logo but was very stylish. Her long legs were straight, and she was young but not too tender, mature and stunning. When the leaders in the room saw the girl behind Mo Jingshan, they all subconsciously glanced at the principal's daughter who was sitting at the table and then at Jin Wan. Jin Wan met everyone's gaze and smiled calmly. She looked around and finally met Professor Lin's eyes. She nodded to him respectfully. Hello, Professor Lin. Professor Lin's eyelids twitched. He had felt that Jin Wan, this little girl, must have a special relationship with CEO Mo, but he didn't expect that CEO Mo would bring her here today. The school leaders also had a little impression of Jin Wan. They immediately looked at her differently and didn't quite understand what was going on. Among the leaders of the Education Bureau, there were several young men in their 30s who were sitting on the principal's side. The moment they saw Jin Wan, their eyes lit up. Jin Wan naturally met their eyes and walked over to sit down with Mo Jingshan. The men in their 30s, seeing that Jin Wan seemed to be Professor Lin's student, subconsciously looked at her and asked cautiously and politely, "CEO Mo, this is?" "My wife, Jin Wan." Mo Jingshan's thin lips curved slightly, introducing her without hesitation. In an instant, everyone at the table was even more surprised. The expressions of the leaders who had an impression of Jinwan stiffened. What? The principal looked at Jinwan in disbelief. When did CEO Mo get married? Miss G, if I remember correctly, isn't she the student in our T University's Professor Lin's class? My wife has nothing to do and opened a studio in High City. She thinks that her management skills are not good enough, so she took some time to come to T City to learn business management. Mo Jingshan's clear and indifferent tone seemed to be talking about something that couldn't be more ordinary. But to the others it was not so ordinary. The dignified Mrs. Mo came to T University to study, but she had been low-key and never revealed her identity. She was even the top student in Professor Lin's class. This was really incredible. At this moment, Jinwan saw the young girl sitting by the principal's side. However, the other party's expression was slightly strange. It seemed like she was undoubtedly the principal's daughter. Nice to meet you, principal. Nice to meet you all. I'm really here to study business management at T University. After all, I'm here to study hard, so I didn't specifically introduce myself. Professor Lin and my father are old acquaintances, but he doesn't know much about my marriage. I've never told him about it. Jinwan spoke gracefully and turned to Professor Lin. Professor, you won't blame me, right? Chapter 258. The fact that Mo Jingshan was already married was undoubtedly a bomb, blowing up everyone present and causing them to be unable to react for a moment. The young girl sitting beside the principal, although her stunned expression when she saw Mo Jingshan earlier was now a little more restrained, her gaze clearly shifted back and forth between Jinwan and Mo Jingshan, as if trying to determine whether he was really married or just found a random woman to be his shield. Jinwan felt that she had made the right decision to come today. Otherwise, if the principal really wanted to introduce his daughter to him, the result would only be unpleasant for both parties. Everyone had arrived and sat down. The school leader's adaptability was not bad. After being curious about Jinwan for a while, they changed the topic. The table was full of people related to the education industry. Most of them were leaders with high positions, and the topics they talked about were basically the same. For example, a school leader poured wine for another school leader and said in a fawning manner, "Director Chin, there are fewer top students in the XX department this year than in previous years. Don't be too strict with the results of this year's exams. Please take care of our unpopular subject." Conversations like this were basically the same, and the topics revolved around T University and T City's education industry. Jinwan listened to their conversation, eating quietly and appreciating the eloquence of these big shots in T City's education industry. The two leaders in their 30s picked up new chopsticks to put food in Jinwan's bowl. After learning that she didn't drink, they eagerly asked the waiter to bring her coconut juice or a glass of lemon water. Jinwan smiled at them and thanked them again and again. Under the table, her fingers were caught and pinched hard. Jinwan felt a little pain and reflexively tried to withdraw her hand, but she couldn't. She turned her head and looked at the man beside her in surprise. Mo Jingshan pinched her fingertips with one hand, raised his arm to pick up the glass kettle by the side, and poured a glass of water for her. As he approached, he asked her in a low voice, "Why are you smiling so beautifully at me? Are you very happy?" "Jinwan, didn't you ask me to come? I can't come here with a long face." In the next second, the man pinched her wrist and exerted some force. "I asked you to sit here and eat, not to sit here and laugh." After all, the two leaders of the Education Bureau were still young. Jinwan smiled at them for a while and almost lost her soul. If they hadn't known that she was CEO Mo's wife, they would have been even more eager to see her. "But I can't be expressionless when I look at others." Mo Jingshan picked up a piece of beef and placed it in her bowl. "Just look at me. If you don't want me to show my face in public, then don't bring me here. You brought me here but you won't let me see others. I asked you to come. Did I ask you to smile at others?" If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have smiled at these people she had never met before. But now that her identity as Mrs. Mo had been revealed, she couldn't be too cold. But since Boss Missouri had already spoken, at most she wouldn't look around or smile at others, all right? Seeing Jinwan lowering her head to eat silently, Mo Jingshan picked up some pepper from her bowl for her. Their actions didn't escape everyone's eyes, but everyone had a tacit understanding and pretended not to see it. They didn't dare to tease them, but they all knew the answer in their hearts. This Jinwan was indeed Mo Jingshan's woman. Her words, actions, and the way they interacted with each other couldn't be faked at all. Even so, the principal's daughter sat there and watched. She suddenly smiled and her eyes fell on Jinwan's face, saying, "How old is Mrs. Mo this year? There really aren't many people who would run out to study business management after getting married." Jinwan hadn't swallowed the piece of meat in her mouth. She took a few seconds to swallow it. Mo Jingshan ignored her, picked up another piece of cod and placed it in Jinwan's bowl. The atmosphere suddenly became a little awkward because of the principal's daughter's words. Everyone present could see that the principal of T University wanted to introduce his daughter to CEO Mo, but before he could extend the olive branch, the principal's wife was here. Although the atmosphere was quiet, the principal was about to say something to smooth things over, when the principal's daughter suddenly smiled again and said to Jinwan, "Hello, Mrs. Mo. Please forgive me for not introducing myself just now. My name is Linda." Hello. Only then did Jinwan swallow the meat in her mouth. However, because she swallowed too quickly, she coughed and choked when she opened her mouth to respond. Mo Jingshan frowned unconsciously, pushed the glass of water he had just poured for her to her, and patted her back with the other hand. Jinwan picked up the glass of water and took a sip, feeling much better. She immediately looked up at the principal's daughter with a smile. "I've heard that the principal's daughter graduated from a famous overseas school. Miss Linda, I've heard about you a long time ago." However, no matter how eloquent Jinwan's words were, her actions with Mo Jingshan were so natural that no one could interrupt them. The principal's daughter smiled. "Really? But I don't think I've ever heard that CEO Mo is married. Sure enough, T-City is so far away from High City that we didn't even notice the news of such a grand wedding." Jinwan had already mentally prepared herself when she arrived. Right now she did not have much reaction. Furthermore, this principal's daughter was clearly somewhat arrogant. Perhaps it was because she grew up in a school environment where everyone else was just an ordinary student, while she was the daughter of the high and mighty principal. Thus, she had developed an innate sense of arrogance since she was young. Jinwan didn't speak but just smiled, acquiescing to her ignorance. Next to her, Mo Jingshan glanced at the principal's daughter across the table, saying indifferently, "It may be too simple to just say that she is Mrs. Mo." Everyone was stunned. Wasn't it because they were married? Was there any gossip behind it? They knew it was impossible for Mo Jingshan to get married so early. Perhaps the words Mrs. Mo were a little exaggerated. There should be some other complicated relationship between them, right? Jinwan was also confused and turned her head to look at him. The atmosphere suddenly fell into silence again. Everyone at the table was curious but didn't dare to ask. The principal's daughter stared at Jinwan as if thinking about the meaning of Mo Jingshan's words. "Is that so? Then it seems that you'd better call her Miss G." The principal's daughter glanced at Jinwan again. Jinwan felt that she couldn't eat anymore. As soon as she put down the chopsticks, her hand under the table was suddenly held by the man's hand and held it. "She's the person I love very much. I love her so much that the word Mrs. Mo is not enough to express everything." Chapter 259. As soon as Mo Jingshan's voice fell, the whole table fell silent. Almost everyone had varying degrees of surprise on their faces. In the beginning, some people thought that Mo Jingshan's marriage was related to a business marriage. Calling her Mrs. Mo was probably just a wife in name, and their relationship was just that. After a long time, it was just a tacit understanding between husband and wife. After all, he was a man who could shake the world in the business world. There was no need to be too concerned about the small details. However, it was impossible for the great Mo Jingshan to speak of his feelings for his wife in front of everyone. Besides, in this world the word love could no longer move anyone. That's what they all thought. However, the man's calm and ordinary words made the principal's daughter instantly speechless. The expression on her face only twitched awkwardly, and she didn't dare to say anything else. Is CEO Mo confessing his love in public? Don't tell me he confesses to his wife every day at home? A school leader asked with a laugh. It's the first time I've seen such a scene. How close must Mrs. Mo and Mr. Mo be to be so unequivocally loved by CMO? I've lived so long, but I still have to see such a scene of dog abuse. Yes, it's called dog abuse, right? It's a new term I heard from my students not long ago. Jinwan's face began to burn. To avoid embarrassing herself with a red face, she hurriedly picked up the glass and drank the water calmly. The principal's daughter couldn't stand it anymore. She got up and left with the excuse of going to the bathroom. Seeing this scene, the principal also felt embarrassed. He blamed himself for not investigating Mo Jingshan's marriage before trying to matchmake Mo Jingshan. Not only did he lose his daughter's face, but he also made it so embarrassing. Then there were some flattering words from the school leaders. Jinwan smiled politely, kept quiet and ate the meat calmly. On the way, Ji Hongwen called. Jinwan got up and went to the door of the private room to answer the call. Ji Hongwen said coldly, "I know what happened to Mengran. Don't take it to heart. It's not the first time this child has done such things. You gave her chances again and again, and now she even went to T-City to target you. Wan, don't believe her nonsense. Dad will definitely give you an explanation. Jinwan knew that Ji Hongwen had returned to High City today and didn't have time to see her. It's all right. Dad, don't worry too much. I know what to do with Menggran. Standing outside the private room, Jinwan held her cell phone and said softly, "You've just returned to High City. You'd better go to bed early. Your health is the most important thing. Don't be too angry and worried because of these things. Menggran has scolded you so much. If I don't punish her, I'll punish her. I'm afraid she won't be able to control you." Ji Hongwen angrily said, "I'll arrange for her to go abroad in the next 2 days. She's not even 20 yet and she's already idling at home all day. She's not like you who went abroad to study at an early age. I've really spoiled her all these years. I think if she really refuses to change despite repeated admonitions, we should quickly send her abroad. Out of sight, out of mind. Her hands won't be able to stretch so far and won't be able to come back and pester you and Jingshan." Jinwan took a look at the time. "I'm eating out now. I don't know when I can go home. If you haven't gone to bed yet, I'll call you." Ji Hongwen was silent for a moment and then said, "Go on with your business. Don't call me." "But the things Menggran said to you are you?" Jinwan said, "Dad, although she always makes a fuss, some things are not groundless. I hope I'll always be your daughter, but I want to know the truth. Now that I've grown up, I hope we can find a chance to talk about things that need to be made clear." "All right. You don't have much time left to study in T-City. Let's talk about it when you return to High City." Ji Hongwen understood what Jinwan meant. He couldn't comfort her by telling her to calm down and not think too much because she was very calm now. Ji Hongwen's attitude confirmed what Menggran had said. Jinwan agreed, said a few more words and hung up the phone. She had just put her cell phone back into her bag and was about to go back to the private room when the principal's daughter, who had just gone to the bathroom, came back. Jinwan nodded at her and stepped aside to let her in first. The principal's daughter didn't move but just stood at the door with a smile on her face, saying sweetly and softly, "Mrs. Mo, I'm sorry for offending you just now. As the daughter of a scholarly family, Miss Linda's EQ and IQ shouldn't be too bad." Although from a woman's point of view, Jinwan could understand how she felt when she came here for a blind date, only to be interrupted by someone else. Of course, this was only from the point of view of the principal and the principal's daughter, but for Mo Jingshan, it was nothing more than a dinner that he had been trying to refuse for many days. "How long have you and Mo been married?" The principal's daughter couldn't help asking. Jinwan took a look at her. "We'll be married for more than a month." "Then it seems that I'm really ignorant. What I said just now. I was impulsive. Please don't mind, Mrs. Mo." The principal's daughter was sober. She knew that she couldn't get what she wanted, so she quickly accepted the reality and didn't want to offend Mo or Mrs. Mo because of this. Obviously she wanted to make up for what she said just now. But to be honest, Mo Jingshan's behavior just now was so clear that anyone who still dared to provoke Jinwan was basically a fool. Mo Jingshan had obviously put Jinwan in the most important position in his life. Who dared to provoke Jinwan? She wanted to make things right as soon as possible to relieve the embarrassment. Jinwan just smiled at her and gently shook her head, indicating that it didn't matter. Then the two women opened the door with a smile and walked back into the private room. After dinner, the school leaders didn't dare to be too rude to Mo Jingshan because they didn't know his preferences, so they didn't dare to suggest going to a KTV or some entertainment club. Seeing that Mo Jingshan came with his wife, they didn't dare to make any suggestions. In the end, they only chatted at the table. Jinwan occasionally entered a topic, and they all raised their eyes to give her a polite look. The dinner was a happy one. Before leaving, the school leaders, who were drunk, gave Mo Jingshan their best wishes and were about to praise Jinwan's performance in T University. However, Jinwan was too low-key and didn't pay much attention to her. After thinking for a long time, they couldn't think of anything and could only say one sentence. "Mrs. Mo's academic performance is really good." The corner of Jinwan's mouth twitched. Chapter 260. It wasn't easy for Mo Jingshan to confess to her, and it was in public. Jinwan hid this little bit of joy deep in her heart. She drove home, took a shower, changed her clothes and sat on the sofa in the living room. They were so lovey-dovey that they inevitably kissed. As they kissed, the man felt that this position was not convenient enough. He simply held the woman's waist, lifted her up and placed her on his lap. His warm thin lips moved from her lips to her chin, cheeks and behind her ears. Then he moved down her neck from behind her ears. The man's kiss and breath traveled down from her collarbone, kissing her softness that was gradually perking up. His hand also silently reached under her nightgown. His warm palm held onto a soft ball, and his breathing gradually became heavier. Jinwan was wearing a very ordinary nightgown. It was neither conservative nor sexy. It had to be taken off from the bottom up. Buzz, it was a text message. Jinwan was pressed against the sofa by the man. Hearing this sound, she suddenly remembered that this was the sofa. Before returning to the bedroom, she was actually stripped clean. She immediately opened her eyes. Mo Jingshan paused for only a second. His low voice had been dyed hoarse by the Passion Valley. Don't mind it. Continue. With that, he held her chin and continued to kiss her. Jinwan? Why did Boss Missouri like to do it on the sofa recently? My phone is ringing. I heard it. Let me take a look. It's just a text message. So I took a look. I don't usually have junk messages on my phone. Those that can be sent to me are basically people I know. And no hurry. Don't mind it for now. Mo Jingshan. The sound of text messages did not stop ringing once. Several messages were sent over with a buzzing sound. Who would keep sending text messages in the middle of the night? Except for Xia Tian, no one else would be so crazy. No, get up. With the sound of the phone by her ear, Jinwan could not concentrate. Mo Jingshan did not care. Earlier on, when he saw her smiling happily at others, he already wanted to press her down here and teach her a lesson. It wasn't easy for her to come back. How was she going to cooperate today? Why would she care about the person who sent her messages in the middle of the night? Jinwan could not do anything to him, nor could she push him away. She bit her lip helplessly and said, "Let me take a look first. What if something happens? Can't I continue after reading it? One more minute won't make a difference." When she said that, he paused. He narrowed his eyes and said hoarsely, "I'll give you a minute. You'll pay me an hour?" What a beast. Seeing that she didn't speak, he reached out to take off her panties. Fine. An hour it is. Anyway, even if you don't give me a minute, it's still up to you to decide how long we have to do it tonight. After balancing the benefits, she felt that it didn't matter whether she agreed to this request or not. She just had to give in verbally. As expected, Mo Jingshan stopped. Jinwan hurriedly sat up, grabbed a handful of her messy hair behind her shoulders, and picked up her cell phone to take a look. Mo Jingshan saw the woman sitting on the sofa. Her clothes were almost peeled off. The air in the room was still a little cold. Seeing that she was sitting there looking at her cell phone without wrapping herself with her clothes, Mo Jingshan frowned and patiently waited for her to read the message. He then expressionlessly picked her up from the sofa and carried her back to the bedroom. He kicked the door open, put her on the bed, and lifted the quilt to cover her body that had been contaminated by the air. Sure enough, Jinwan guessed right. Only Xia Tian dared to send such a bombshell message in the middle of the night. Xia Tian. Boss, the performance report and financial list of the studio last month have been sent to your email. Boss G, please check it. Xia Tian, you really have a good eye. In the past 2 months, I didn't have to do anything at all. I just had to deal with the investors who came to negotiate the transfer of land and real estate. And I didn't touch the properties with a high market value under the studio's name. But some of the shops and small places with particularly good geographical locations that you bought sporadically were snatched up by those investors as treasures. Xia Tian. The lowest price they offered was enough for our studio to survive for several years. We made a net profit of more than 40 million yuan. I think the price can be raised further, so I didn't sell it. Anyway, you are not in a hurry to sell it. Xia Tian, by the way, I just wanted to ask you. Qinfeng Company is going to buy the land in Dawang City from us for 350 million yuan. Do you think the price is right? Do you want to sell it? Xia Tian, your small studio is nominally a studio, but in fact, no one can guess that you have so many treasures in your hands. If you sell all the existing properties, your studio's working capital will be more than that of many listed companies. You always say it's a small studio. Well done, you are becoming more and more low-key. You don't show your true colors, do you? Xia Tian, what time is it? You don't even reply to my messages? Are you asleep, or are you rolling around in bed with your dear husband? Tut, a guy who values love over friendship. Xia Tian, but then again, dear Boss G, now that your studio is so rich, why are you still complaining about being poor every day? If I really break off my relationship with the Xia family, I may really have to rely on you to support me. Which leg of yours needs a pendant now? Make room for me. I want to hug it. Xia Tian, you have only taken over Han Tianyuan's company for a few months. You only spent 30 million yuan on this studio, didn't you? Yesterday I checked the finance and projects only to find that in just a few months, the profits have exceeded 10 times. Sure enough, you were right to insist on the road of real estate from the beginning. Then there was a lot of nagging. After reading it, Jin Wan directly replied, "One day you will see the profits increase by 100 times. In the next few years, it will definitely be a good time for the domestic real estate market to rise sharply. But the tree that stands out in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. It's good to keep a low profile. After all, there are so many real estate tycoons in China. If we are suppressed by these tycoons as soon as we start, we will have a hard time in the future." In less than a minute, Xia Tian replied her with a high five emoji. The two of them had a tacit understanding. Most of the time, as long as Jin Wan said a few words, they would understand each other's plans without saying anything more. When she put down the cell phone, Jin Wan found that Mo Jingshan was not in the bedroom. She grabbed her nightgown and put it on, lifted the quilt and went into the bathroom. She tied up her home bun hair, turned on the tap, and washed her face with cold water to cool down the crimson color on her face. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a string of light and shallow hickeys left on her neck. Chapter 261. Although the hickey was not too serious, Jin Wan still insisted on not letting Mo Jingshan bite her neck at night. However, this man did the exact opposite. The more she resisted, the harder he kissed. In the end, he bullied her on the bed until she could only moan and beg for mercy. Only then did he stop ravaging her neck. However, the strength of his lower body only increased. In the latter half of the night, Jin Wan discovered that the man by her side was not around. When she woke up, she saw that he was in the living room. He seemed to have just received a call. Seeing that Jin Wan was awake, he placed the phone down and tossed it on the sofa. "Why are you awake? Do you still have a lot of work to do in High City? Actually, you don't have to stay in T City to accompany me. I can return to High City in a month. Won't it disturb your work if you accompany me here? I haven't been idle in T City recently. The working style of the subsidiary company is no different from that of High City. It's just that the working environment is different." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "It's not that many days. It's rare for me to have enough time to accompany you. Isn't that good?" Having enough time to accompany her meant that he had enough time to sleep with her, tease her, and look at her. "I feel that work is more important right now. After I return to High City, I don't have anywhere else to go. When the time comes, we can accompany each other." Jin Wan felt that if she continued to be slept with by him every day, she really would not have the energy to focus on her studies. Although she was first in the test for the first half of the month, she was really afraid that if this continued, her results for the next half of the month would plummet. After all, as long as this man was by her side, she would not be able to focus on anything else. Her entire mind would be teased by him. "We're husband and wife. We can't not spend time alone. If you're worried that you'll be affected because of me in the future, I won't enter when you're revising in the study." Mo Jingshan smiled faintly. It was clear that he had seen through her thoughts. "Agreeing to let you study here is already my biggest concession. I'll make time to accompany you. Don't tell me you still want to live apart from me?" Jin Wan glared at him with sleepy eyes, speechless. "If you have to keep your distance from me so that you can study in peace." The man had already walked over and led her back to the bedroom. He carried her back to the bed and placed his palm on her heart. His tone was meaningful. "That means you can't control your heart. You can't calm down when you see me. Can you blame me for that?" Jin Wan, was it because she had suddenly woken up in the middle of the night, so her mind was still a little muddled? How did he manage to convince her with just a few words? Mo Jingshan saw that she wanted to defend herself but felt that he was right. He held her face with a dark gaze and gave her a lingering kiss. "You don't want to sleep anymore? I let you go early because I heard you begging for mercy. If you don't want to sleep, I don't mind continuing to enjoy myself until I'm satisfied." When the kiss ended, Jin Wan's eyes immediately became misty. She tried hard to control her breathing. She couldn't help but press her legs together to prevent his hand from entering her. In Mo Jingshan's eyes, it was as though a fire had been thrown into his already dark eyes. "You did it on purpose?" He bit her lips hoarsely. "Earlier, I realized you weren't here and suddenly woke up. I'm still sleepy." Jin Wan turned her face away and leaned into his embrace. Tonight, he only wanted to do it once before letting her go. However, back then he had used a lot of force. Even though she had showered and slept, she still felt that her body was extremely sensitive in his embrace. Could it be that in the past it had been too long? Now that he had let her go this time, she suddenly felt uncomfortable? She had actually become this sensitive after just a few words. Mo Jingshan's dark gaze landed on her face. His dark eyes carried a hint of suppressed laughter as he patted her back. Seeing that Jin Wan was really curled up in his embrace, he did not force her to continue. He rubbed her head, indicating for her to sleep peacefully. 2 days later, Jin Wan received a call from Auntie Qin. Auntie Qin was the Ji family's helper. She had watched Jin Wan and Ji Menggran grow up. Eldest Miss, Director Ji wants to send second Miss overseas. He has even booked the school and plane tickets. For the past 2 days, he has locked second Miss up at home and has even sent bodyguards to keep a close eye on her. Second Miss hasn't eaten for 2 to 3 days, but Director Ji still insists on sending her overseas. He won't allow her to stay in Haicheng. He won't allow anyone to plead for her. Your relationship with second Miss is the best. Director Ji usually listens to your suggestions. Hurry and plead for her. Auntie Qin's voice came from the phone. Her heart ached and she was anxious. In the Ji family, perhaps only Auntie Qin did not know what stage Jin Wan and Ji Mingran's relationship had reached. She had personally watched the 2 children grow up. Right now they were no longer as close as they were when they were young. The entanglement between them was not something that could be explained with just a few words. Perhaps it would not be bad for Auntie Qin to keep this beautiful relationship in her heart. Jin Wan did not speak clearly. She only said, "I'll call my father to understand the situation." "That's right, Auntie Qin, I have something to ask you." "What is it, eldest miss?" "More than 20 years ago, when my mother married into the Ji family, you were already working for the Ji family, right?" "That's right." "Then before my mother married into the Ji family, did she have frequent interactions with anyone? For example, a man or someone close to her?" If the other party was not Auntie Qin who had watched her grow up, Jin Wan would not have asked so directly. Auntie Qin was silent for a long time. Jin Wan could sense that she was startled by this question. After a while she finally answered, "Eldest miss, I don't know about this, nor have I heard of it. When Madam first married into the Ji family, I was also new to the Ji family. There are many things that I'm not clear about." "I understand. Thank you, Auntie Qin." Jin Wan could hear the pause in her tone. She did not ask further and hung up the phone. On the other side, Mo Jingshan, who had heard Jin Wan's voice earlier, calmly asked, "Your father plans to send Ji Menggran overseas?" "He doesn't wish to see the sisters fighting against each other. Sending her overseas can be considered as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. On one hand, he won't be annoyed by her. On the other hand, he can prevent me from doing anything to Ji Menggran. From a father's perspective, I can understand. After all, if we really count it, Menggran is his blood relative. To be able to do this, he is already very considerate of my feelings. Who says you can't touch her while she's overseas? If you want to touch her, you can do so at any time," Mo Jingshan calmly said. Chapter 262. However, there was no need for Jin Wan to take revenge. 3 days later, High City's Aviation Administration released a piece of news. Flight BA-168 from High City to London, England, had an air crash over the Pacific Ocean due to an unknown malfunction. 57 Chinese people, 108 British people, and dozens of passengers from other countries had died on the plane. China and England had already deployed maritime rescue teams to search and rescue, but based on the weather conditions and the surrounding environment of the accident, it was estimated that almost no one had survived. After learning of this news, Jin Wan subconsciously called Ji Hongwen. However, there was no answer for a long time. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her apartment in T-City, looking toward the Pacific Ocean. The day before yesterday, she had called Auntie Qin again and learned that Ji Menggran had taken off from High City this morning. She was on the plane that crashed, Flight BA-168. Jin Wan did not find it hard to accept the news of a so-called sister who had troubled her in both her previous lives. However, her first reaction was that Ji Hongwen would definitely not be able to take it. Ji Hongwen's call remained unanswered for a long time. Jin Wan decided to call Auntie Qin again. When she picked up the call, Auntie Qin was crying the entire time. She said that Director Ji's condition was not too good. After learning of the plane crash, he had locked himself in his office and had not come out for several hours. No one in the company dared to barge in. Jin Wan would never forgive him no matter what. However, in Ji Hongwen's eyes, Ji Menggran was still his biological daughter. The moment Mo Jingshan entered, he saw that Jin Wan had put on her clothes and was preparing to leave. "It's already 6 in the evening. Where are you going?" "I'm going back to High City tonight. I don't know if I can make it back tomorrow morning." Tomorrow have Feng Ling help me apply for leave from Professor Lin. Jin Wan anxiously spoke and prepared to leave. Mo Jingshan glanced at her and reached out to hold her wrist, bringing her back. At the same time he placed her bag down. Right now, even if you rush to the airport, the earliest flight back to High City will be after midnight. There's no use going to the airport now. Calm down first. Tell me, why are you going back? Mingran went to London today. Something happened to her flight. I'm afraid my dad won't be able to take it. I have to go back to see him. Jinwan did not believe that Mo Jingshan did not know about such a big piece of news. News of a plane crash would usually be reported immediately in the country. There was indeed a plane crash on the flight from High City to London. After receiving the news in the afternoon, I sent someone to check with the airline company. Ji Mingran didn't board the plane. She was only temporarily included in the missing list. Mo Jingshan stared at Jin Wan's slightly pale face and said lightly. Jin Wan looked at him, opened her mouth and finally calmed down. She didn't speak at first, as if to make sure he was telling the truth. Then she picked up her cell phone and called Ji Hongwen, but he still didn't answer. But my dad isn't answering his phone now, and the people from his company don't dare to enter his office to look for him. I'm worried. Director Ji has been through many trials and tribulations in the business world. His mental fortitude won't be so weak. I'll send Shinmu to Ji Corporation to take a look and have him inform Director Ji that Ji Mingran didn't board the plane. Mo Jingshan pressed her arm. Don't panic. Leave it to me. That's right, Shinmu did not follow Mo Jingshan to T-City. Shinmu was still in High City. As Mo Jingshan's most capable assistant, he would definitely have a way to enter the Ji Corporation to meet her father. Jin Wan nodded, turning her gaze toward Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan knew that she was a little anxious and did not say much. He only patted the back of her hand comfortingly and picked up his phone to call Shinmu. After personally hearing Mo Jingshan's instructions, Jin Wan glanced at her cell phone. Another piece of news about a body being retrieved by a search and rescue boat appeared on the screen. Perhaps it was because she had already lost all feelings. The many years of vicissitudes in her previous life and the hatred she felt today had covered up the so-called feelings they had for each other for the past 10 years. From the moment she first heard about Ji Mingran's plane crash until now, Jin Wan's heart had not been moved at all. She was only slightly dissatisfied that she could not personally let Ji Mingran experience the path she had taken in her previous life. She also felt a little disappointed. Even now, when she learned that Ji Mingran might not have been on the plane, she did not feel anything. Things like feelings, if they no longer existed, would never exist. Things that had cooled, things that had been chilled, could never be warmed up again. Jin Wan was carried back to the sofa by Mo Jingshan. She had been staring at her cell phone, wondering when Ji Hongwen would call back. Mo Jingshan took off the coat she had put on earlier and placed it by the side. He pressed her down on the sofa and leaned over to look at her. Are you sad that Director Ji didn't answer your call? Jin Wan did not move. Mo Jingshan did not ask her more. He sat down by her side and pressed her head against his shoulder. Jin Wan closed her eyes and was quiet for a long time before saying, regardless of whether something really happened to Mengran or not, I feel that after this incident, my father will instinctively start to avoid me. Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her head. He caressed it and lowered his head to kiss her forehead. Wan. His voice was low and carried a hint of pity and understanding. Regarding the relationship between you two daughters, he did not handle it very well, and because he was too busy, he neglected to discipline Ji Mengran. But you can't think that he will gradually drift away from you just because you know that there may not be a real blood relationship between you and him. And maybe I'm thinking too much. Mo Jingshan's warm voice rang in her ear. Since you were very young, you have been the pride in his eyes and the daughter he has focused on cultivating, which proves that he has never considered the issue of blood relationship. It's enough for him to think that you are his daughter. After what happened today, he needs a quiet environment to calm down for the time being. He is not avoiding you. In this world, all kinds of accidents can happen at any time. Only long-term and sincere love will not disappear. I treat you like this, and so does Director Ji. Jin Wan buried her face in his arms. I hope that I will always be his daughter. Even if one day the Ji family is no longer as prosperous as before, I am willing to be his daughter. The man was silent for a few seconds before he said in a low and indifferent voice, if Director Ji knew what you think, he would be very pleased. He has not let you down for the past 20 years. This is the best reward you can give him. It is much more practical than calling to ask about your concern. She hugged him and buried her face deeper into his neck. The little woman was no longer as stubborn as she had been a few months ago. At least when she was occasionally vulnerable, she would get used to hiding in his arms. This kind of trust was enough to comfort Mo Jingshin. Chapter 263. Jinwan wrapped her arms tightly around Mo Jingshin's neck, softly saying, "Life is truly too unpredictable. It's so unpredictable that if you don't grab hold of something today, you'll completely miss it and lose it tomorrow." The man pinched her face. "At least you won't lose me." Jinwan did not speak. There were many unexpected laws in this world. She was afraid of those laws that were always contrary to one's thinking, and always went against everything one hoped for in one's heart. It was not that Mo Jingshin could not tell that after Jinwan learned about her parentage, although she appeared calm and unaffected, there were still some things in her heart that she could not get over. "Trust me. No matter how unpredictable life is, I'll always be here." Jinwan nodded, burying her face deeper into his neck. Mo Jingshin directly lowered his head, returning a deep kiss. To university. During class, Jinwan went to the bathroom. Mo Jingshin had been in T-City for more than half a month, and most of his work had entered the final stages. In a day or two he would be returning to High City. Although Jinwan was reluctant to part with him, there was not much time left before she returned to High City. She could not really delay his work. After all, for her sake, Mo Jingshin had already increased the workload in T-City to the maximum. He had also extended the time limit as much as possible. It was precisely because they were about to separate again that Jinwan was almost squeezed dry by Mo Jingshin for the past 2 nights. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were entangled to death. Ling Feifei followed him into the bathroom. Seeing that Jinwan was there, she approached and symbolically washed her hands. She squeezed some hand sanitizer on and turned to look at the light blue turtleneck Jinwan was wearing. She revealed a harmless smile. "Jinwan, don't tell me you and Feng Ling really know each other? Previously, when you were in the dormitory, your relationship had always been mysterious. Recently, I haven't seen Feng Ling, and you haven't returned to the dormitory for more than half a month. Bai Wei and I have been missing the two of you." Jinwan glanced at her, raised her hand under the dryer, and unhurriedly blew on it. As she blew, she said lightly, "It's not surprising that you suspect the relationship between me and Feng Ling, but if you say you miss us, forget it. If we're not here, won't you have a place to put your luggage?" "How would I dare to put it there? Don't mention luggage. Even if I toss a piece of clothing onto your bed, Bai Wei won't be able to resist reprimanding me. She'll insist that the two of you haven't returned to the dormitory recently and that the bed is still yours. Although you and Feng Ling aren't in this dormitory, there's still Bai Wei watching over it." Ling Feifei rubbed her hands as she spoke. She then deliberately glanced at Jinwan's clothes. "T-City isn't as cold as High City. Why are you wearing a turtleneck here? Aren't you hot?" Jinwan's eyelids lifted, her lips revealing a hint of mockery. "What are you trying to find out from me again?" Towards a small character like Ling Feifei, she did not wish to waste any time beating around the bush. Soon they would be going their separate ways. Why did this Ling Feifei look down on her so much? When they were living together, she found fault with her. Now that they were living together, she still wanted to find fault with her. Jinwan did not know which thorn in her had pricked her. If she did not touch her, it would itch. Ling Feifei looked at Jinwan's usual indifferent expression, her delicate, fair face remaining indifferent. After washing her hands, Ling Feifei pulled out a piece of tissue. As she wiped her hands, she said, "Earlier in the classroom, I saw a red thing around your neck. I didn't get a good look at it before it was covered by your collar. Don't tell me you were injured while you were living outside the school? Let me take a look. Is the injury serious?" As she spoke, Ling Feifei suddenly raised her hand to tug at Jinwan's collar. Jinwan was expressionless as she raised her hand to block it. At the same time, she curved her lips lazily and coldly. She smiled ambiguously. "When did you become so concerned about me? You could even notice such a small mark on my neck, and you even followed me to the bathroom to take a look?" After hearing her words, Ling Feifei's lips curved in an unfriendly manner. "Jinwan, as expected, you have a guilty conscience." Jinwan shook off her hand, casually tidied up her clothes and turned to walk out. Ling Feifei could not hold back her anger and directly followed her. Jinwan heard her footsteps but ignored them. As she walked, she slowly patted away the non-existent dust on her body. "Even if you hid well, you were still discovered. Didn't you just find an opportunity to hug CEO Mo's thigh? Why, do you feel good fooling around with CEO Mo behind his wife's back?" Ling Feifei spoke with a sour tone as she leaned close to Jinwan's ear. "These days have you been with CEO Mo? Has he really taken a liking to you?" When she heard this sentence, Jinwan's footsteps paused. She turned to look at Ling Feifei, who appeared as though she had caught onto someone's weakness. Jin Wan only glanced at her before sneering in disdain. A few seconds later, she continued walking toward the professor. When she was about to reach the classroom door, Jin Wan slowly and indifferently said, "There really aren't many people like you who only believe in your own foolish heart and refuse to believe in your own eyes." Ling Feifei leaped in front of Jin Wan and stared at her. She raised her voice slightly and said agitatedly, "You really are a hypocrite. That day in the stadium, if not for me, would you have had the opportunity to be so close to CEO Mo? Right now, I'm asking you from the perspective of a participant, did you go behind my back to seduce CEO Mo? You still have the cheek to speak so confidently?" Seeing Ling Feifei's agitated expression, Jin Wan raised her eyes and coldly watched her. "What did you participate in? That day in the stadium, you didn't even have the cheek to take the initiative to speak to CEO Mo. If I hadn't told you that you're from High City, you most likely wouldn't have had the chance to speak to him in this lifetime." Ling Feifei glared at her. "At the very least, I was the one who pulled the strings. Is this how you treat me?" Jin Wan did her best to retract her gaze as though she was looking at an idiot. She calmly watched her. "So, if I had really slept with him these days, what would you have done?" Ling Feifei widened her eyes. Her expression was one of disbelief. Hearing and guessing were one thing, but she did not expect Jin Wan to openly admit it. Jin Wan no longer looked at her and entered the classroom. After sitting down, she kept the books on the table. Ling Feifei followed in and stood by her side. She lowered her voice and warned, "Jin Wan, Xiao Mo is already married. You're a third party. Don't you have any shame?" Chapter 264. The moment her true thoughts were exposed, she was slightly embarrassed. Ling Feifei saw Jin Wan's unafraid expression and could only conclude the following points. Pleased, arrogant, and smug, as though she had someone supporting her from behind. Right now, who else could be supporting Jin Wan? Wasn't it Mo Jingshan? Jin Wan did not look at Ling Feifei's expression. She picked up the thermos flask on the table and opened the lid. Through the steam rising from the flask, she quietly watched Professor Lin, who had walked in due to the bell ringing. Ling Feifei finally returned to her seat. However, her gaze occasionally shifted to Jin Wan's high-collared shirt. Even if Jin Wan's shirt was very high, under her careful observation, she could still see the vague kiss marks that would occasionally appear when Jin Wan turned her head. COMO appeared to be cold, low-profile, and not particularly approachable. Would he be so intense? At night, Jin Wan did not agree to go shopping with Bai Wei. After class, she left T University and saw that Feng Ling had parked the car outside. It had been a few days since she saw Feng Ling, but it was as though nothing had happened. Her hair had been cut a little shorter and she was still dressed in black. She stood by the car in an agile manner. Jin Wan said that she wanted to go to the mall to buy some things. Feng Ling accompanied her and did not say a single word. It was as though she had returned to the state she was in when she first arrived by Jin Wan's side. Since Feng Ling was avoiding the topic, Jin Wan would not purposely tear open her wound and ask about it. She did not say much and only occasionally asked if the things she bought were nice and waited for Feng Ling's evaluation. She did not mention anything else. At 6 o'clock, Feng Ling sent Jin Wan to the restaurant below Mo Jingshan's branch company. When she arrived, Mo Jingshan was already sitting there. From the looks of it, he had been waiting for a long time. She did not know if he had heard or sensed her movements, but before she walked over, he had already looked over. Their eyes met. Jin Wan saw that the man's ink-black eyes seemed to be brimming with smiles. He then stood up. She walked over and he happened to pull out a chair for her. He then placed her coat and bag by the side. His low voice was filled with a doting smile. "Didn't I ask you to come over at 5:30? Why are you so late?" Feng Ling has rested for a while. It seems like her work efficiency needs to be improved after returning to work. Jin Wan raised her head to look at the man's handsome chin. "Earlier I went shopping with Feng Ling. I saw a few nice clothes and tried them on." "The new clothes are in the car?" "I didn't buy it. After trying a few, I felt that the style was not much different from what I usually wear, so I didn't buy it." Jin Wan calmly sat down and received the menu from the waiter. She glanced through it and said, "You've been in T-City for so many days and you've been cooking at home almost every day. It's fine to occasionally eat from restaurants outside, but I still prefer the food you make." After ordering, Jin Wan took a sip of her hot drink. When she saw the man sit down, her clear and indifferent voice rang, "Someone is following you. How did you know?" Jin Wan did not immediately turn her head to look out. She had sensed it the moment they left T University and could easily guess who was following them. She decided to ignore it and only drove here after strolling with Feng Ling. However, the other party was still following them. Such a low-end method of following. The car is parked right behind Feng Ling's car. Who is it? Mo Jingshan asked mildly. Jin Wan placed her cup down, pursing her lips slightly. It should be Ling Feifei. She suspects that I'm seducing a married man like you. She's probably trying to take some evidence to threaten me. Alright. She might even be able to extort some conditions from you that you normally wouldn't agree to. Mo Jingshan found it funny to see her impatient expression. School and work are on two completely different levels of intelligence. You sure can endure it. What else can I do? You were right last time. Being too serious with this kind of child will only lower my intelligence. Jin Wan watched the man's smiling eyes and pursed her lips. I just need to persevere for 2 more weeks. After the T University anniversary and the final test, I can return to High City's embrace. Mo Jingshan raised his brows. You plan on attending the anniversary? I didn't attend it when I was still a student. Since I've encountered it this time, I might as well participate. Earlier, I was preparing to buy clothes for the anniversary. I didn't want to be too high profile or too casual. After searching for a long time, I couldn't find anything suitable. The man watched her, smiling mildly. I'll return to High City tomorrow night. Tonight, I'll accompany you to shop for clothes? No need, there's no rush. When the time comes, just pick one from my wardrobe. From the corner of her eyes, Jin Wan saw that Ling Feifei's car was still parked outside. The car window was rolled down slightly. She was most likely secretly taking photos. She did not turn back to look. She only held onto the cup of hot drink, asking, "How's my dad?" The day before yesterday, after Ji Hongwen met with Shinmu, he did call Jin Wan. However, he only said a few simple words of concern and did not speak further. Right now, it was still uncertain if Ji Minggran had gone missing or met with a mishap. If she had not met with a mishap, why was there still no news of her? However, Mo Jingshan had found out that Ji Minggran did not board the plane. It was impossible for someone to disappear just like that, much less coincidentally during a plane crash. Under such circumstances, it was not appropriate for Jin Wan to call back frequently to ask about it. After all, even if Jin Wan was not the mastermind behind Ji Minggran's departure, she was still the main reason behind it. He's still waiting for news. His emotions are more stable than you think. There's no need to worry. My dad is someone who is very good at controlling and hiding his emotions. If not for that, I wouldn't have only found out about my identity from someone else's mouth at such an old age. At this moment, the waiter placed a bowl of borscht on the table. Mo Jingshan scooped some soup and placed it in front of Jin Wan. His deep eyes carried a hint of gentleness. Don't get to the bottom of everything. It's most important to stabilize your own state of mind. Jin Wan looked at his handsome face and glanced out of the corner of her eyes. If that crazy girl outside uses the photo she secretly took today to threaten you, a married man, or to threaten me, what do you think I should do when such a senseless situation happens? Jin Wan did not plan on letting Ji Hongwen's matter affect the mood of this meal. She took the initiative and decisively changed the topic. The man smiled. His long arm reached over to touch her head. He chuckled softly. Will you make her regret looking down on you for the past 3 months? Or will you use the title of the real Mrs. Mo to slap her face? Jin Wan took a sip of the soup and calmly said, that will depend on how much she seeks death. Chapter 265. Mo Jingshan raised his brows slightly, speaking in a low and heavy voice. After returning to High City, it won't be as relaxing as it is in T City. Since you're still here, cherish your last month of school life and spend some time with your friends. Don't be too hard on yourself. Hearing his words, Jin Wan suddenly felt that her delicate nose was about to turn sour. Previously, Mo Jingshan had said that when he left, he couldn't wake her up. Otherwise, would he have to watch as she hugged him and cried? At most, they wouldn't be apart for more than a month. Right now, Jin Wan was beginning to feel reluctant to part with him. When they returned, Feng Ling did not follow them. As Jin Wan fastened her seatbelt, she glanced out of the car window. She saw that when Feng Ling hailed a taxi and left, her figure was still lean and nimble. Perhaps she was thinking too much. For someone like Feng Ling who had fought her way through a group of men, perhaps her heart was more tenacious than most women. Or perhaps Feng Ling was better at hiding her feelings than most women, completely sealing away the emotions she shouldn't have in a corner of her heart. A shadow pressed down on her. By the time she reacted, Mo Jingshan had already helped her buckle her seatbelt. The black SUV stopped in front of a custom-made gown shop in T City. This shop was several times more high-end than the one she had seen with Ling Feifei and the others. Since you've decided to attend T University's 100-year anniversary celebration, don't be too perfunctory. This is a branch opened by a French designer friend of mine. Many of the gowns here are very suitable for you. Go in and take a look. If there's anything suitable, buy it. The gowns here are all measured and tried on before being airlifted to your size. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, you can send it back to Paris to have it changed. Jin Wan originally did not plan on wearing a gown, but since Mo Jingshan had already spoken, she thought for a moment and nodded. Mo Jingshan alighted from the car and opened the door for her. He held her hand as they entered. The employees immediately came out to welcome them. When they saw Mo Jingshan, it was as though they had seen a live face scanner. Without calling their boss or confirming his identity, they had already recognized him and greeted him with a face full of smiles. Mr. Mo, there weren't many people in the shop and it was relatively quiet. There were only a few young couples trying on their dresses, and they caught everyone's attention as soon as they entered. Jin Wan's hand was held by the man's warm hand. He didn't look at anyone's eyes, ignored their envious eyes, and took her to see all kinds of dresses inside. Simple, complicated, classical, modern, low-key, and luxurious. The crystal display windows had everything they wanted. Jin Wan's gaze finally fell on the innermost strapless gown embellished with gold. This gown seemed to be a new design for the Paris Autumn Fashion Show. This year, it was fashionable to have such a shiny but not too luxurious gold gown. Jin Wan was very satisfied with the design and color of the gown. The skirt was spread wide, almost in the shape of an A. The layers of soft chiffon were decorated with tiny stars. It was a little mischievous and romantic. Overall, it was very beautiful and suited Jin Wan. Seeing that she liked it, the shop assistant on the side smiled and said, "Is this it? We'll bring it out for you to try on immediately." Jin Wan neither nodded nor shook her head. Indeed, she liked it. However, she felt that if Mo Jingshan wasn't in T-City for the few days she was dressed like this at the school anniversary party, wouldn't she appear too gorgeous and lonely without anyone by her side? You don't like it? Seeing the trace of hesitation in her eyes, Mo Jingshan stood by her side, his breath enveloping her nose. "I didn't even know that T-City had such a good gown shop. I've never seen it before." Jin Wan raised her eyes. Mo Jingshan watched her. "Do you like it or not?" "I like it, but isn't it too beautiful? Those classmates of yours are either young and ignorant or they're arrogant and overbearing. For the school anniversary they'll only wear more beautiful clothes. This is already considered very low-key." Mo Jingshan's expression was serious as he spoke, but Jin Wan could see from his eyes that he seemed to be very satisfied with this gown. The shop assistant had already carefully brought out the gown, smiling as she invited Jin Wan in to try it on. Jin Wan nodded and entered the inner room. There were many mirrors in the changing room. After the shop assistant helped her put it on, she sighed in admiration by the side. Jin Wan lifted her long hair and looked at herself in the mirror. It seemed like she had not specially dressed up for a long time. Even when attending banquets, she did not put in any effort to dress up. Right now, her mood was no longer that of a 21-year-old. She was always muddling through many things, and she had almost forgotten about her beauty and the stunning appearances she had at various banquets when she was a teenager. The lighting in the changing room was very gentle. She touched her hair and looked at herself. Right now, her fair and clean face was slightly more dignified than before. It was as though this was the reason why she was known as Hai Cheng's #1 socialite. The top half of the gown was strapless, perfectly displaying her exquisite collarbones. Slightly lower, the soft, white skin was faintly discernible. It was not revealing, but it gave off a comfortable and seductive feeling. The woman's slender curves were perfectly displayed. This gown was very well fitted. There was no need for any alterations. Jin Wan looked at herself in the mirror. It seemed like she was this beautiful when she got married. It was just that back then she did not pay much attention to appreciate it. She walked out of the changing room. It turned out that Mo Jingshan was sitting on the sofa outside, waiting for her to come out. He was flipping through a magazine in his hands, sitting there elegantly and quietly. When he heard her voice, he turned back. The first thing that flashed past the man's eyes was warmth. He was not as breathtaking as the other male customers who were choosing gowns for their female companions. Mo Jingshan understood how beautiful Jin Wan was. Thus, breathtaking was no longer suitable for him. It was just that every time he saw her more beautiful, he wanted to hide this little woman away to prevent others from thinking too much about her. Regardless of appearance or temperament, Jin Wan was like a dignified and romantic princess. Right now, it was rare for her to specially dress up. She did not have as many flashy thoughts. Instead, she was more gentle and reserved, making her look even more beautiful. Does it look good? Facing Mo Jingshin, Jinwan was still slightly nervous. It looks good. Very good. The man was still not stingy with his praise. Jinwan immediately smiled. Then I'll take this one. I won't go try on other styles. I'll just wear it with a pair of shoes of the same color for the school anniversary. The shop assistant by the side continued to praise it. Jinwan told the shop assistant that she wanted this one. She then said to Mo Jingshin, I'll go back to the changing room to change. Chapter 266. Jinwan was startled and subconsciously stepped back. However, this movement was caught by the man's eyes. He held her waist with one hand, and under the envious and heckling gazes of the shop assistants, he brought her into the fitting room. The door was closed by the man, and then a familiar scent pressed against her. Jinwan reflexively stepped back. By the time she reacted, the man's tall body had pressed her against the door of the fitting room behind her. Although there was a lot of space here, there was only him and her. Jinwan's face strangely heated up. She looked around, wondering if there were any surveillance cameras in the fitting room. Why did you come in? I want to change out of the gown first. The man's fingers moved through her long hair. He looked at her black and white eyes and kissed her lips. Jinwan? You're so beautiful. I want to kiss you first, the man said hoarsely against her lips. Jinwan? He drove home and entered the door. The lights in the living room were not turned on in time. Mo Jingshin held her face with one hand, lowered his head, and kissed her lips harshly, continuing what he had been restraining himself in the fitting room. After kissing for a while, Jinwan put her hand against his chest and breathed through the gap between their lips. However, in the next second, her face was forced by the man again. He kissed the corner of her lips, and his ink-like eyes were filled with endless darkness, almost swallowing her up. Still hiding? Jinwan blinked. Why do I feel that you're especially eager today because you're returning to High City tomorrow night, as if you're going straight to the battlefield? In the past, no matter what, Mo Jingshin had always been exceptionally patient with her. Each time, when the conditions were right, success would come naturally. But now, after changing out of the gown, she was forced out of that shop, forced into the car, and then directly pressed against the wall after returning. Mo Jingshin lowered his eyes to look at her and said indifferently, You're right. I'm indeed planning to go straight to the battlefield and return to High City tomorrow night. Can't I devour you clean tonight? Jinwan? Then isn't this too cruel? Treating me to dinner tonight, bringing me to buy a gown, and now that we're home you're so direct. I'm almost suspecting that I'm not your wife, but a little mistress whom you rarely get to have fun with. The man chuckled hoarsely but ignored her words. He reached his hand under her waist, pulled down the zipper of her skirt and quickly peeled off her skirt. Jinwan rushed to hold his hand. She blushed in fright at the way he was going to do it without any foreplay. Mo Jingshin. He lowered his head and kissed her cheek, chuckling hoarsely. Just now in the fitting room you obviously couldn't control yourself. Now that we're home, do you still need me to tease you again? Wasn't it already prepared? This man. Jinwan felt as though something was about to explode in her head. She blushed and whispered, Mo Jingshin, shut up. I was in a hurry to change. I didn't. Before she could finish speaking, her skirt had already been peeled off. The man raised his hand and the skirt was tossed out, landing on the carpet near the sofa. He then pressed her into his embrace, pressing his lower body tightly against hers. She could clearly feel that right now, he was indeed in a state where he needed to rush to the battlefield. Jinwan. In the past, why did she feel that this man had a pure heart and few desires? His abstinence was most likely a facade for outsiders to see. The man's hand came to peel off her top again. Jinwan rushed to grab his hand tightly. Mo Jingshin narrowed his eyes, his hoarse voice softly coaxing by her ear. Let go in? Jinwan raised her eyes to look at his handsome face. She looked at his seductive ink-colored gaze. His eyes were focused and filled with a rare urgency. All of a sudden, Jinwan's heart was filled with an indescribable sense of accomplishment. For someone like him to be unable to control himself, aside from their mutual habits and desire for each other's bodies, it was also because he had once said that he loved her very much. His feelings for her were so deep that even the words Mrs. Mo were insufficient to express it. He belonged only to her. The moment this thought entered her mind, Jinwan suddenly stood on her tiptoes to take the initiative to kiss him. In an instant, the man who originally wanted to peel off her clothes gave up on this momentary tug. Without any hesitation he carried her up. As Jean Wan softly cried out, he bent down to seal her lips and rushed into the bedroom, pressing her onto the large, soft bed. His soft kisses moved to the back of her ear. His low, husky voice pounded against her eardrums. You probably don't know how much self-control I had to use in the fitting room to not tear off your gown and harshly fuck you there. Jean Wan did not know how beautiful she was when she wore that gown to the point where the man could not control himself. However, for some reason she had a very accurate intuition that tonight she would most likely die under his body. Even if she did not die, she would at least be half dead. To Mo Jingshan, the short separation that was about to come could be as short as a week or as long as a month. Each of these factors determined that tonight, Jean Wan would be tormented by him until late into the night. And with this man's stamina, every time he did not intend to let her off easily, he would make her cry until her voice went hoarse. However, every time she cried out hoarsely, she would be met with a new round of ruthless bullying. In the end, she could only turn her sweaty face away and weakly bite the corner of the blanket that she had just pulled up. She held back the undisciplined sounds in her mouth, afraid that she would provoke him again and again. If that happened, this night would truly be endless. Late at night, Jean Wan was completely exhausted. She did not even have the strength to raise her arms. The man carried her to the bathroom to wash up and helped her put on a comfortable nightgown. He slept by her side and held her to sleep. Jean Wan lay in his embrace. She was so tired that she could not even open her eyes. However, her fingertips could not help but clutch onto his arm, refusing to let go. She opened her eyes slightly and stared at the face that she could not be more familiar with. The man's lips were just the right thickness and the bridge of his nose was high. His eyebrows were too thick, and if they were too light they would be too light. Especially this man's eyelashes, which were thicker and longer than most women's. His handsome face had a lazy aura because of the earlier strenuous exercise, and his body emitted the same scent of shower gel as hers. Sensing her gaze, Mo Jingshan gently rubbed her head. He knew that she was very tired but could not bear to sleep. After all, although he would only be returning to High City tomorrow night, she still had classes tomorrow. This meant that they would have to separate early in the morning. Jean Wan could not take it anymore after being rubbed by him. She closed her eyes. Chapter 267. Mo Jingshan had too many business matters to attend to today. Before he left, he naturally woke up early. When he opened his eyes, he saw a fair and clean face leaning against his chest. The little woman's eyes were closed, and her seaweed-like hair was spread across the pillow. She appeared drowsy and beautiful. She slept deeply and was completely defenseless. The man propped himself up on his elbow and looked at her for a while. Suddenly he leaned over and kissed her. It wasn't the usual morning kiss. Instead, he directly and fiercely snatched her lips and her breath in a way that would wake her up. Jean Wan was startled and immediately opened her eyes. She had slept in his arms since last night and had finally fallen into a deep sleep. Yet she was suddenly woken up by the man. She opened her eyes in a daze, unsure of what had happened. When the drowsiness in her eyes faded, she met the man's smiling black eyes and heard his low and heavy voice say unhurriedly, "I'm going to work. I'll leave tonight. I won't be going to T University to see you, N?" Realizing that he had deliberately woken her up, Jean Wan knitted her brows in exhaustion and soreness. She did not want to hear him say that he was leaving. She appeared angry as she said angrily, "Are you going to let me sleep? Last night you didn't let me sleep well. When I finally managed to sleep soundly, I was woken up by your kiss. So annoying. Hurry back to High City and let me sleep alone. I don't want to sleep with you anymore." Mo Jingshan originally wanted to bully her when he saw her angry expression. However, when he heard her last sentence, his deep black eyes narrowed dangerously. "Say what you just said again?" It was fine that he woke her up, but now he was being fierce to her? Jean Wan pushed him angrily. "I don't want to sleep with you anymore. I won't sleep with you anymore." The man lowered his eyes to stare at her. His thin lips were tinged with a faint but dangerous smile. His early morning voice was especially low. "You won't sleep with me anymore?" His tone was clearly threatening. "I won't." Before she could finish her words, she was kissed by the man. Following that, the man pressed his body against hers. He forcefully turned her face and kissed her fiercely. He also took the opportunity to hold her hands, which were about to push him away, and pressed them against the top of her head. Jean Wan was kissed until she could barely breathe before she hurriedly opened her eyes. She whimpered but was unable to speak. In the end, the man bit the corner of her lips, and as soon as she could, she rushed to say, "Mo Jing." The man directly sealed her lips again. After ravaging her for a while, he licked her rosy lips that had been kissed since early in the morning. He looked down at the sleepy and helpless woman under him from above. His lips curved slightly. "Are you sure you don't want to sleep with me? You won't come with me after returning to Sea City?" Earlier, Jinwan had said those words out of anger. Why didn't she realize that this man had such a nasty side to him? What he meant was that she didn't need to sleep anymore. Tossing and turning in the middle of the night was still not enough? Was he not afraid of kidney deficiency? Jinwan was actually not afraid of death. She wanted to say that she wouldn't follow him, even if they returned to High City. If she had the guts, she would stay here until her flight was delayed and not return to High City. However, before the words could reach her lips, the man seemed to have no intention of letting go of such an opportunity. The moment her hands regained their freedom, he bit down on her fingertips. His burning palms landed on her sore and weak waist as he murmured softly against her lips, "After we return, if you dare to stop me from sleeping, even if I have to tie you up, I'll tie you to my bed." Jinwan weakly said, "Are you going to squeeze out every last bit of energy from me today?" The man chuckled softly. He kissed her, but his hands did not stop moving. She harumphed slightly, her brows furrowing. She spread her legs as far apart as possible, allowing him to leave a mark on her body before returning to High City. Early in the morning light quietly peeked in through the gaps of the curtains. In the quiet condominium, only Jinwan's soft pleading and low panting could be heard, as well as her sobbing cries. In the end, Jinwan finally laid completely motionless on the bed. She was truly exhausted. She opened her eyes slightly, watching the man for a few seconds in a daze. In the end, she struggled to pull her hands out of his grasp. In the end, she bit her lips and said, "If you continue to be so unrestrained in the future, I really won't sleep with you anymore." The man's lips curved slightly. He pinched her face pitifully and did not continue kissing her. He only gently kissed her lips. "Be good, continue sleeping." After saying this, he got up from her body and covered her with the blanket again. In the end, when the man finally got off the bed, his hand was held by the person on the bed. He turned around, lowering his head to look at her. The sunlight that sneaked in through the gaps of the curtains landed on the man's body. It was as though the tall man was framed with a layer of gold. He was as handsome as a god. "After returning to High City, remember to call me every day when you're not busy. Otherwise, I won't know when you're busy or when you're in a meeting. I won't even be able to call you." Mo Jingshan looked at her delicate and charming appearance. His thin lips curved up, tainted with a doting taste. "I understand." He couldn't help but reach out to pinch her face again. He then got up and closed the gap between the curtains, blocking the ray of sunlight so as not to disturb her sleep. The result of being completely exhausted was that by the time Jinwan finally got up, it was already noon. Mo Jingshan had kept breakfast warm in the kitchen before he left. She could eat it immediately after waking up. After washing up, Jinwan took out breakfast and sat by the dining table. As she ate, she felt that her legs were trembling uncontrollably. Why did she court death and provoke him this morning? She clearly knew that when he returned to High City today, he would definitely find a way to eat her up inside and out. In the end, this morning she simply walked right into his trap. Originally, Mo Jingshan was deliberately seducing her, but in the end she really gave him a chance. After Jinwan finished eating, she straightened up and brought the utensils back to the kitchen. She had just turned on the dishwasher when she suddenly heard the phone on the dining table ring. She rushed to wash her hands, wiped the water off and walked out. She picked up the phone and saw that it was Feng Ling calling. She immediately pressed the button to answer. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.